I would like to start today's meeting, February 28th. This is the Endangered Species Recovery. Today we're talking about the draft habitat conservation plan for KIUC. We'll start call to order. Can you hear us okay on the virtual? Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Great. If you'll go around the room, I'm Lainey Berry. I'm the chair from Department.
I'm the deputy.
We can't hear really clear the others.
Okay, we'll try and reposition. You only hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Want to try again? Melissa Price, on behalf of UH.
Now we can.
Service.
Bob Reed, U.S. Geological Survey.
Linda Child, Deputy Attorney General. Everybody this one? Linda, did you hear everybody in the room that time?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I just want to check to see committee members who are online. Yeah.
Aloha Kavika Winter, ESRC member.
You're frozen. We have Bob, so. Sorry, Jim.
I can replace.
Okay, I'd like to call to order, and just, we're waiting for, there's one more committee member who may join. We'll introduce her when she arrives. She's just landing. That's Lisa. Just some housekeeping. Letting you know, this is the first time we've done a hybrid ESRC meeting with online and virtual at the same time. So we're just working out the kinks, and I think we've got everything under control, hopefully. Mina is online, and so Mina, if you have, just let us know if there's any issues with the audio or the visual. So the members who are joining virtually, we can see you with your raise your hand. So we'll just get, if you have a question, just raise your hand, and we'll get to you. Lisa's just joined, so we'll just introduce. So the ESRC always conducts site visits when we're evaluating habitat conservation plans. But in this case, most of the sites that are in question are remote and inaccessible to us in person. So KIUC has kindly compiled photos and footage of the sites that we can go through. We will take a drive to the west side this afternoon to look at some minimization examples and beach lighting. We have to break at noon from this room to ensure we have enough time for this afternoon's schedule. So if necessary, we may have to table some of this morning's discussions until the meeting tomorrow. Tomorrow's meetings is going to be in the Lahui Library, and we'll start at 9 o'clock. In other announcements, we have upcoming ESRC meetings scheduled on the 29th of March for wind projects and the 31st of March for the HCP annual. Lisa, can you just, we've done introductions, but can you just introduce yourself? And this is the speaker here, so you'll have to project.
Aloha, I'm Lisa Spain. I'm an ESRC member at large.
All right.
From Hawaii Island.
Okay, thank you. So we have, this morning, we have a presentation by KIUC to run through the conservation sites. power line train, central line reconfiguration, and street lights. Then we have a presentation by Molly Stark, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Program Coordinator of Save Our Shearwaters. And then item 4 is a review of the afternoon agenda, and then we're going to break for lunch, and then we're going to go jump into transit. The afternoon we have 1:30 with Part Ula Ula Historic Site in Waimea, 30 Kwayele Waterbird Sanctuary, and at 3:30 at the St. Teresa's Catholic Church, and we will adjourn. Right. Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to KIUC. They have some PowerPoint presentations and videos to watch, so we will be streaming those through the presentation. I have with me
we can't hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
My name is Dawn Huff. I have here presenting covers Kyle Pias, David Siffin, Ray Adele, John Brandon, and Ellen. Molly is running a little bit.
It's cutting off. Is there a way that you can maybe switch to from where you're screen sharing?
Was that, sorry?
The conversation is cutting off. So we can't hear everything you're saying completely. It cuts off every now and then.
That's happening for...
It's the phone.
Yeah. So I think it's picking up. It's just breaking up. She said, like it's fine. Yeah. Right. Yeah, we'll have to. So Mina, we're just working out an alternative.
Okay.
Can you hear it? Oh. Yeah. That's weird. Every other word is coming through. Like it's the link. It's not the microphone is fine. It's not the phone, it's the connection. We can try. I mean, I've done it before by phone. I can try that. So we're just going to hang up and at least we can pass the phone around. All right.
So it's,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
can you hear us?
yeah, that one's here is much better.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. So this is now the live mic. Okay. Thank you, Lainey.
Yeah.
Okay. Take 3. Good morning, everyone. Dawn Huff, Program Manager for KIUC's Threatened and Endangered Species Program. Presenting with me today is Andre Rain and Mark Travers from Archipelago Research Conservation, and Kyle Pius from oh goodness, Alex Restoration. And I also have from ICF David Zippin, Tori Adele, Ellen Berryman, and John Brandon. Molly from SOS is running a little bit late, but she'll be here soon. Research. Is that okay now?
No, it's because someone just they weren't. Oh, okay.
Oh,
never mind. All right.
okay,
Well,
okay.
Not take 4.
Okay. Okay, we're going to start with a video this morning, a video of a thermal image video taken by ARC. Andre's going to talk you through that. I'm going to turn it over to you, Andre, to start. Here's your mic.
Hello. Yeah. So this is just a really quick video. It's 30 seconds, but this is just from a thermal camera of Upper Lima Huli Preserve.
Andre.
It actually looks like the Alps there, I know, but it's actually, trust me, it is
Great.
Hawaii. And it's just to illustrate how many birds are actually flying over these areas.
Sorry, I don't think that. Are you? That's it's not showing.
We don't
That's
see the video.
It's showing the PowerPoint presentation.
It was sharing.
Okay,
Right
so here-
now, right now, what we see is the PowerPoint.
That's Mieta.
Does say it's featuring. Oh, do you have it on extended screen? Because if you have it on extended screen and you're sharing your screen 1 or your screen 2, it's only going to show the one you should.
Well, no, it's not.
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Yay.
Take 2. Yeah, so this is a thermal camera video from Upper Lima Huli Preserve. Just showing, once you start using the technology such as this, and I don't know how well it translates on a big screen, but you can see all those white dots, and there, for example, is clearly a Hawaiian petrel, is lots and lots of Hawaiian petrels and mule shearwaters flying over this site, which is Upper Lima Huli Preserve. It, to me, illustrates, the difficulty of actually coming to grips with how many birds are actually in these areas, because when you're up there, it's dark and you can just hear the birds calling, but you can't see them unless you have access to technology such as this. But also the benefits of this kind of technology, because once you start using this kind of equipment, you can clearly see that there's a lot of birds up there. And this is the case with all of the management sites that we work in. There's, it's a far cry from what it used to be before humans came to these islands. But there are still, these areas are important refuges for both the A'o and the Ua'u. And there are a lot of birds flying up in the sky. And this is one of the ways in which we can see them through this kind of technology. So there's the 2 Hawaiian petrels chasing each other. This ridge, for those of you who are familiar with our tracking work with the data loggers years ago, that ridge there is actually the ridge where all of the birds that we were tracking was flying over. So it really is a sort of proper highway of mule shearwaters and Hawaiian petrels moving up the valley to their breeding grounds in places like Upper Lima Huli, Wainiha Valley, and Hononapali Natural Area Reserve. So I think that was really the point of that video illustration.
Okay, thanks, Andre. So next we're going to show a video. It's clips of both photographs and video footage of the conservation sites themselves and their labels. Also, at the end, there's a clip of Powerline Trail and the LED diverters being installed on Powerline Trail.
there's a thing at the top, like a mute on the green, under new share. My speaker, can I turn this on?
I want to pause it first.
It's just music,
Oh,
so
okay.
there's no narration.
Maybe some. Okay. Cool. Fine.
So one of the points of this video is to show the remoteness of the 10 conservation sites and also the ruggedness of the 10 conservation sites. So it's awfully difficult to see from a simple air photo or just looking at maps. So that's why Google Earth can be helpful, because it does have the topography. And so this video is walking you through each of the 10 conservation sites to give you a sense of the size, the location, the proximity to each other, and their position on the island. So you can see here, the Upper Limahuli Preserve is the first one we're showing.
Can we pause here for a second, Tori?
I'll do a lot of pausing.
Can you go back to want to just point out the landing zones and weather ports. So at each of the conservation sites, we have these symbols. The symbol down towards the middle of the site is for a weather port. That's the campsites where people stay when they're working at the site. And then the little helicopter symbol is for the landing zones where the helicopter comes in, drops people off or picks them up.
Let's put on speaker. Sorry, never mind.
Yeah, go ahead. So you can see this is one of the larger of the conservation sites at over 400 acres, owned by the National Tropical Botanical Gardens. And this is helicopter footage above that site to give you a sense of the ruggedness. The ruggedness is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's certainly a good thing in terms of being difficult for some of the predators to reach, but of course it presents some very challenging logistical problems with access, with landslides, with fence construction and maintenance, and with predator control.
Sorry, so, when you switch between speakers, can you just sorry, you don't introduce yourself because they can't see you.
Sure. And this is David Zippin with ICF speaking.
David.
Yeah, we'll point that out in the next slide. Yeah, we're just highlighting one site at a time, and then the other adjacent sites are shown in the pink color. Yeah. So there is a separate predator exclusion fence that you can see here in yellow outline near the weather port and the helicopter landing pad. PF just stands for predator fence or predator exclusion fence. So this is about a 3-acre site, I believe.
It's actually about a 12 acre site. It's to be constructed. It will be a new predator exclusion fence that will be constructed within the ungulate fence at Upper Limahuli Preserve.
John, the perimeter fence around the Reproductive, it is, we'll start with, Joe. It's the talking stick.
Good morning, everyone. This is Michelle Bogardus. My question to Dawn, and actually this might be for Kyle and everybody, is the fence around Upper Limahuli. Do you remember the height of that one? Is that deer sufficiently deer proof?
Sorry, no, it's pigs. It excludes pigs. It's not high enough to keep deer out all the way around the entire perimeter. And those kinds of details, Michelle, we cover in the slide presentation. We'll go through each site again and we talk about the specific, no, you're good. Just so you know what's coming up. We talk about each site, the fencing at each site, and what type of protection is already in place at the sites, and then what we're proposing to do for management at the site.
Just, sorry, would you cover the status of the ungulate removal at those sites?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
Sorry. Wanted to make sure that later on you'll cover the status of the ungulate and predator removal at each site.
Yes, we will cover current situation, what has had eradication occur and what hasn't, and then what we will do as part of our proposed management for eradication. So just back where we are here, we're at the North Bog Weatherport, which is actually currently undergoing some rehabilitation. A lot of the weatherports are older facilities, and where maintenance is part of our program for these facilities. Pohakea, approximately 292.5 acres. You can see weatherports and landing zones scattered throughout the site.
That's fine.
It's an interesting landing zone there at Pohakea. It's literally the top of the ridge. You get out of the helicopter, you stand on the top of the ridge, you don't move till the helicopter leaves. It's an interesting experience to visit that site. So within the larger Pohakea site, there is a smaller, approximately 3/4 of an acre predator exclusion fence and social attraction site within that fenced area. This is imagery of that predator exclusion fence and the social attraction site. You can see, actually you could see artificial burrows there on the ground. Pihea is the next site. And then Hanakoa, 178.9 acres. There's the weather port there at Hanakoa. All of these sites, except two, are helicopter access only. The two sites that crews can hike to are Pihea and Honopu. Hanakapiai, approximately 201 acres. No fencing at Hanakapiai or Hanakoa, no fencing protection at either of those sites. That is an older weather port at Hanakapiai, which is being replaced this year. It has fallen apart. Dead rat, just a good thing to see. And then we turn to Honopu. Honopu is a site that KIUC has not started managing yet. We'll be starting this year. Fencing, we'll cover this later, but the fencing was constructed by others. There's an ungulate fence around the perimeter of the greater site that is still under construction, but I think it's close to completion. And then there's a predator exclusion fence also at the site, which we'll see here on the video and also in the PowerPoint presentation. This is the ungulate fence. And again, Michelle, it's not, the full length is not deer height. Predator exclusion fencing at the Honopu PF site, approximately 3.3 acres. And there is a social attraction site that started operating in 2022 at the site. It's an image of the top half of the fence. And then site 10 is to be determined. It will be somewhere in the general area of that yellow line shown there on the map. We have several shortlisted sites that we'll be assessing in 2023, and we'll be selecting a site at the end of 2023. Powerline Trail. Powerline Trail is an area on the island where lines run through a remote area. Highest strike risk on the island. Very difficult to access and implement minimization there. So we wanted to just give you a sense of what the lines look like and what the terrain looks like. There used to be a road. There's still a remnant of a road, but it's not drivable. It's walkable, but not drivable. So it took us some time to figure out minimization up here because we needed technology. And then we found a company who could install the LEDs using drones. When we first started looking at this site and minimization here, this was not possible. It became possible over the last couple of years. There's still some things to work out, but they have been able to successfully install LEDs on the top layers on Powerline Trail.
Do you want to clarify what you mean by LEDs?
Oh, sorry, LED reflectors. Yes, thank you.
Just to remind people, this is Lainey, just to remind people online, if you need to make a comment, please don't use the chat. Please raise your hand because we're not supposed to chat amongst ourselves because that's not accessible to the public. Thanks.
Do you want questions later? Can we ask questions during the video?
Maybe we'll just wait to the end of the video.
Okay.
So we're almost finished. We're done. All right.
So we can take questions on video portion.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to go to questions from the committee. I think if I just, I think you can pick up mostly what we're saying.
Kavika, did you want to ask your question first?
Sure, thank you. Great presentation. Super excited to see the installation of reflectors on the power line trail. Quick comment, since I'm filling the Hawaiian seat on the council, some of the place names were spelled wrong. Hanakapi'ai has a diacritical kako over the P, Hanakapi'ai, like sprinkling salt. But other than that, I had a question about Rick Barry's land. Is that not happening anymore? Is it part of this HCP?
Unfortunately, we completed management at Upper Manoa at the end of 2022. We are not able to, or we were not able to reach agreeable terms with Rick Barry to include Upper Manoa in the HCP. So no, Upper Manoa will not be part of the HCP.
Any part of it whatsoever, or just not moving forward?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
I thought that KIUC was claiming mitigation actions in the past on that land. Are you not counting any of those actions, or are you just not counting actions moving forward?
Well, those actions are not part of the HCP, the longer term HCP. They were part of the short term HCP, and we did do management actions there through the early implementation period, but we ended those in December of 2022. So they're not part of this proposed 50-year term HCP.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome.
This is Melissa Price. I'm curious whether, like, what the relative impact is of the power line that goes across the middle of the island versus those that you're more easily able to mitigate for around the outside, and what portion of that is mitigated by the drone added reflectors.
Okay, so I think I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking. So Powerline Trail, you're asking about what are the strike impacts at Powerline Trail, and what are we doing? What is the effectiveness of minimization that we're doing at Powerline Trail?
Yeah, basically the relative strike rate on that power line, because you said it's in an
It's
area
high.
that's heavily impacted, and how much of that is mitigated for by those additions. I assume they're not as effective as ones that you can more easily access.
Actually, the LED estimated strike reduction, and this is estimated strike reduction for LED diverters, is 90%. We don't have the full length of the line hasn't been completed yet. It's partial installation at this point in time. So once the full length of the line is completed, then we will be doing observer monitoring and acoustic monitoring to determine if that 90% has actually been reached or not. But I'm going to let Mark talk to you about impacts and what he knows at this point in time about effectiveness of strike reduction.
So the LEDs, in theory, should, Mark Travers with Archipelago Research and Conservation. So the LEDs, in theory, should be highly effective, or they're either going to be effective or not. And we've been watching them for a few years, and the birds are all reacting as we would hope. They're not being attracted to the lights. That we have 3 years of data on that. And they are reacting at further distances and moving up and over. So the LEDs are looking really good from a visual point of view.
Can you just say a little bit, Mark, about the level of strike, maybe percentage wise of impacts of strikes there versus if you have that off the top of your head?
Yeah, off the top of my head, it would be about a third of the island's risk is on that. So it's disproportionately skewed to that area. There's just very tall wires, very dark area, lots of birds moving.
Thanks, Mark. We also, Melissa, towards the end of our presentation, we have a video of birds flying up and over on the lines where LEDs are installed on power line trails, so you can actually see what that flight pattern looks like. Any more questions?
Another question for Mark or Andre. If my recollection is correct, you couldn't do auditory monitoring of power line trail just because it's logistically impossible. Am I remembering that correctly? So when you say it's high strike likelihood, that's based on modeling, is that right?
No, so actually that's power line trail is a great acoustic monitoring zone. I think what you're referring to is the initial installation of LED diverters occurred in between our monitoring sites. So our historical data wasn't really relevant to looking for change before and after, but that'll change now that LEDs are being installed everywhere on the power line trail. So we'll be able to monitor it as we have for the last 10 years.
Awesome, thank you for clarifying. One more question about, I don't know who answers it, but it was mentioned that you guys are only putting LEDs on the top wire and you're not done yet. So when you say you're going to be done, is that all wires or just the top wires along the whole stretch?
Right now, we're just going to do the top wires along the full length of power line trail. There are some issues with the drone getting between the wires and getting the lower layers. We're working with the drone contractor on that, and hopefully, we can find a solution at some point. But right now we know that we can install on the top layers, and so we're covering that first.
Okay, that makes sense. I would imagine that it's difficult to navigate through the wires. Has Mark or Andre, have you guys looked at the efficacy of top wire only versus all wires as in other areas?
For the top two wires, the acoustic change in the very small preliminary study was 56% reduction in strikes.
Versus 90 with all wires?
90 was the estimate from data that came from other off-island.
Could you folks point us to someplace in the HCP where that's written up in more detail? I'd like to take a look at it.
Chapters 4 and 5.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions on the video portion? Okay. If there aren't any more questions on the video portion, we can turn to the PowerPoint presentation, which is, oh, sorry, one more question.
Sharing screen. See those buttons down there, optimize for video clip and share sound. Check those boxes.
Thank you, Lisa. Oh, I'm sorry, Melissa. Sorry. Okay, in this presentation, we're going to cover the conservation sites, go through them individually again, more slowly this time, more detail on fences and acreage and all of that, and proposed management. We're also going to talk about minimization towards the end, and Mark's going to go through a couple of avoidance videos for you. Okay, so the conservation sites are the primary conservation measure for the covered seabirds, specifically Newell shearwater and Hawaiian petrel. They provide 4 general benefits for the entire 50-year permit term: site protection, site management, which includes the control or elimination of predators and control of invasive plants, the attraction of seabirds to nest at the sites through social attraction, and intensive monitoring. The site selection is a critical part to ensure that the benefits are received. The potential conservation sites that were evaluated, that started back in 2002. It's been a multi-layered process through the years and still ongoing, actually, for Site 10. We've worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and DOFA and other local partners these guys here with me today specifically. And we have selected 9 sites, identified 9 sites. We'll select a 10th site in 2023. The potential conservation sites were scored against 14 criteria. They were scored separately for Newell shearwater and Hawaiian petrel. Some of the criteria, summary of the general criteria is presence of seabirds at the sites. That includes if an existing colony is present, if an existing colony is adjacent to the site, and if birds are transiting over the site. Are multiple species present at the site or just one species? Invasive plants, or the percent of coverage of invasive plants versus native plants that are beneficial for burrowing, terrestrial or aerial predators presence. Is the site accessible, and can monitoring and predator control measures be implemented? Is it feasible to implement them? Is fencing, either predator exclusion fencing or ungulate fencing practical at the site? Will we have landowner support? And are anthropogenic threats present at the site or far away from the site? Details of this are in Appendix 4A of the HCP for the site selection process. So 9 sites are identified, 10th site this year. We'll select this year. This will look familiar from the video, this mapping here. You can see that all of these sites are located in the northwest corner of the island, near inland, just inland from the Nepali coast. Most of the sites KIUC managed either through the short-term HCP or in the early implementation process. I mentioned earlier, Honopu, we have not started yet, but we will be starting management at Honopu this year. Most sites contain both species, Newell shearwater and Hawaiian petrel, but some of the sites only contain one species or predominantly one species. So long-term management and monitoring at these sites has provided a lot of very useful data that we use to help inform the longer-term HCP. Protecting these sites over the last 10 years or so has led to data that shows us the management actions are effective. It's led to substantial growth at all the sites. On the table on the right, we have estimated breeding pairs present at each site. I'm going to let Andre talk to you about how those breeding pairs were estimated.
This is Andre Rain. Yeah, so as you can imagine, looking at the videos of the terrain and the fact these are nocturnal birds, it's quite difficult to estimate population size within these colonies. And we have a certain number of birds that we have found on the site, certain number of burrows that we monitor with regularity, but those are not obviously the only birds that are nesting in the area. So we developed a population estimate for each site. These estimates, we've been using these now, this method for, I think, 4 or 5 years in the annual reports. And what we did was first we took each conservation site and we overlaid for each species the habitat suitability models that Jeff Troy et al. Produced. Their published peer-reviewed models. One was in 2014, one was 2017. And that gave us suitable breeding habitat in each area. We chose the higher classifications of suitable habitat for, so 7 or above, and that was in consultation with Jeff himself. And so that gives you the area within each site, which is suitable breeding habitat for the birds. But obviously, the birds are in a lot lower density now than they were in the past because of all of the various threats that we're all aware of and we're discussing now. So then we overlaid on each of those maps auditory survey polygons. So those are polygons based on auditory surveys for both species over the last decade, and we do those every year. And that gave us a handle on the distribution of the birds within each site now. So that cut the area down to total suitable habitat that currently has birds breeding in it. And then for those auditory survey polygons, we split them into a variety of different categories. So for the high estimates, we used all the polygons that we had for each species, and the low estimate, we used only ones which are classified as hotspot heavy, so lots of birds seen during surveys or ground calling. So that's how we got low and high. And then within that area, we then used our nearest neighbor distances between known burrows to create a density and create a population estimate that way. On top of that, because some of those auditory survey polygons overlap, obviously the birds cannot breed in the same patch of land. And so for those overlap areas, we further reduce the population size by saying, for Upper Limahuli, if it's 70% Newell shearwater known burrows and 30% Hawaiian petrels, in those overlap, we allocated 70% of the area to Newells and 30% to Hawaiian petrels, and then used the density to get a population estimate within those. And then we added everything together. So that's how we've ended up with those population estimates. So you can see, for example, Limahuli has between 498 and 617 breeding pairs. I think we're monitoring somewhere in the region of 125, something like that, breeding pairs, burrows. So about maybe 4 or 5 times the number that we're actually monitoring. And Hawaiian petrels, it would be 112 to 135. And there, I think we have about 50 pairs that we're monitoring. And then you can see that's all of the estimates going down. You can see some zeros there. Poakea, PF, and Hanapu, PF. Those are the predator-proof exclusion sites. They were initiated last year, so we started social traction for mainly Newells in those last year, but currently there's no birds actually breeding within the area, although we're getting some really good, we'll talk about that later, but we're certainly seeing a lot of birds coming down on those areas, which is great. And then I think as Dawn mentioned earlier, some sites are very heavy on one species and not the other. So Pihea is a good example. There we've got an estimate of 645 to 815 Hawaiian petrels, but basically no Newell shearwaters, and that's because that site is almost entirely Hawaiian petrels. There's maybe the odd Newells that's along the edge of the Kalalau Valley. And then I guess conservation site 10, the estimate there is Upper Manoa's estimate.
That's the estimate we're aiming for.
Right.
So one of the critical pieces for site 10 is that it has an existing population of Newell shearwater. We'd like to see an estimate, breeding pair estimate around those numbers at site 10.
And I guess just one other thing, one other step for total area when we're working our way through all the area on GIS, we use total surface area. So we paid attention also to the slopes and drainages to get our total area where the birds might be breeding.
Andre, you mentioned something about Manoa in relation to site 10. What was that reference about?
That population estimate that's there, 198 to 283 Newells and 0 Hawaiian petrels, that was the estimate for Upper Manoa, right? Is that right, Dawn?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's what we're using as our goal for breeding population at site 10.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Totally good.
For navigation purposes, can you tell us where this table is in? It's chapter 4, not appendix 4. Okay, thanks.
I don't know.
Oh,
Thank you.
Hi, this is Torita. Appendix 4A breaks down the site-by-site description of, the weather parts and things such as that, the lay of the land, more so. And for chapter 4 is the conservation strategy, where this table is found.
thank you, Andre and Tori. Yes, Sherry.
Conservation site 10. Oh, sorry, this is Sherry Mann. I'm with the Division of Forestry and Wildlife on Kauai. Might you have to have 10, 11, and 12? Like, do you really think you can get that numbers, those approximate numbers in one site on the island?
We're pretty confident we can. We'll know more about site 10 probably in September, October timeframe. And once all the survey information comes in, then we'll know, can we do it all on one site or not? Any other questions before we move on? Not yet.
I have a question about the previous section, but I'm happy to wait to the end as long as you guys don't forget about me.
That's okay. We can go ahead and do it now. Which slide was it?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Well, I'm back on the reflectors on the power line trail, but I
Oh,
don't want
power
to.
line trail.
I can wait to the end. Just don't forget about me.
Okay, you know, we have a video of Powerline Trail at the end, so that might be a good place to remember to come back to it.
And then, Andre, at some point in here, are you going to talk about the overall population status estimates for these species? Or is that
tomorrow?
Okay, got it. All right.
That's
Okay.
tomorrow's presentation.
I'm not gonna go there now then. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, just to clarify, for Upper Limahuli, you were discussing there's gonna be a predator-proof fence built there, contained within that existing unit.
Yes.
Okay, so that won't pull out as number 10. That's gonna be
No.
contained within that data that's presented there. Okay.
Yes, Upper Limahuli PF is not listed in this table, but there are actually a few breeding pairs, well, at least around the fence line that we know about. And that's covered in the details slide on Upper Limahuli PF. I think it's 11.
7 pairs that are.
7 pairs along the fence line. Okay, next slide. So this is a zoomed in map. Just to give you a sense of where the conservation sites are in relation to each other. So Upper Limahuli PF up in the top corner here, Pohakea PF, Hanakapiai, Hanakoa, North Bog, Pihea. The greater Honopu site, which is the ungulate wing fences there, and then Honopu PF within that. Oh, yes. Thank you, David. Land ownership. So the green hatching here is state parks. You can see that a portion of the larger Honopu site is in state parks. The sort of teal shaded area is DOFA managed land. So you can see Honopu straddles DOFA and state parks, and the Honopu PF is all in DOFA owned land. And then Pihea, Hanakapiai, Pohakea, and most of North Bog are located in Hononapali Nar, again, DOFA managed lands. A small portion of North Bog is private land. And then Upper Limahuli is predominantly National Tropical Botanical Garden. And then there's a very small portion here also on DOFA managed land.
This is Lainey Berry from DOFA. The Honopu ungulate fence, is that the gap, is that because there's a cliff, or is that yet to be completed?
Yeah, it is actually still under construction, close to being completed, but the gap, it's wing fences basically that use steep terrain in combination with the wing fencing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you said to ask this later, so I'm not sure if this is the right time or not. Deer fencing and keeping those out, because our latest ungulate, we just finished ungulate distribution models or occupancy models for Koi, and the overlap between black-tailed deer and wet sensitive forest is high. That's in their native range, that's what they like, and that's what they're using here. So it's really concerning.
Yeah. The ungulate fencing at all of these sites is really pig height, not. Sorry.
Honopu does have deer fencing on one
All
side
the
of
way
it.
around, on one
It's
side.
portions of it. Yeah, like it doesn't go on the Kalalau rim side, it's ungulate, but on the back and then towards on the west side, it's deer.
Can you talk about the deer populations, what you've seen, what you've
Yeah,
expect
I mean,
to
the
see?
deer are very obviously the blacktails are very cryptic, so you hardly ever see them. It's not like axis deer on Lanai where they're just everywhere and trampling all the burrows. So they are we don't see them very often, but clearly they have an impact on habitat, and there could be a trampling issue too. But when it comes to the ungulates, it's the pigs, which are the big number one enemy for the seabirds out there, because they actually physically dig them up and eat them. I don't know if you want to add anything about deer.
This is Kyle Pius with Halleck's Ecosystem Restoration. The blacktail, as Melissa pointed out, do seem to prefer the wet forest. And the reason I think the deer mesh is being selectively placed at Honopu is the Honopu Valley runs a pretty steep vegetation gradient from wet forest at the top to more music mixed at the bottom. And we've had monitoring cams throughout the valley for a few years now, and we pretty exclusively see the deer in the wet forest portion at the top and not down towards the drier edges of the slope. So the deer mesh at the southern end in the wet forest should be adequate to exclude them from that area.
Just wanted to add one more thing. The deer mesh obviously increases the height of the fence and increases the risk of collision to seabirds because it puts it into further and further into airspace. So we are working with the NARS to put tape, white tape, reflective tape across those. But it does, you do have to think the pros and cons of a higher fence versus more birds hitting it. Yeah.
And we will talk about this a little bit later, but there are also wing fences around some of the sites in the NAR that are just pig height only. But to the best of my knowledge, we haven't had deer in any of those.
Deer mesh on poly fence.
Oh, nice.
Now.
Nice. Thank you, Sherry. That's fantastic. I didn't know that. When is that starting?
I think it started. I'm not sure when it will be.
Okay, great news. Although we have not had deer present at the sites in Honopolynar in quite a long time.
There's been intermittent at North Plug, and NARS has responded to those. They go out and snare for the deer at North Plug.
Right. Okay. We mostly covered this slide, but just real quickly here. The existing conservation sites should be 9, but the 10th will also fit all these categories. Are located in the region that represents the best remaining available habitat on Kauai, existing intact colony populations, remote location, distance from lights and power lines or any other anthropogenic threats, steep and rugged terrain, and native vegetation conducive to burrowing. All the sites can be, it's feasible to access and monitor them. Some of the access is challenging, especially this time of year, but it can be done. We have agreeable landowners on those 9, and that's a pretty major criteria on the 10th site we'll be selecting this year, and past and current management. So we have existing infrastructure in place, and also we would continue to protect thriving colonies. Those were important pieces for us. Okay, Amy, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. This is Amy DeFries with the Portland Regional Office of the Fish and Wildlife Service. Just a question on the bullet there, remote location, distance from lights and power lines. I guess, I'm not totally familiar with how long it's been since you identified the 9 conservation sites. And I'm wondering if that has changed at all. The distance from lights and power lines over time, have the distances decreased because of new developments or anything like that in the area?
It has not changed, and we actually don't expect it to change, primarily just due to county zoning and county development plans. But it hasn't changed since the sites were selected.
Okay, great, thank you. And I guess the other part of that question is, when you guys were thinking about the distance from lights and power lines,
Amy, we lost you.
Yeah, I had a clock that was dinging loudly, so I muted myself. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Um, so the distance from lights and power lines, was there any consideration of, I guess, in addition to the actual, I don't know, maybe mileage distance, was there consideration of the flight paths of birds and whether those flight paths crossed power lines on the landscape?
Yes, there was consideration of that. We know that these sites have less risk, less exposure. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you know about flight patterns.
This is Andre Rain. Yes, we have tracked both Newell's, Shearwater, and Hawaiian Petrel from Upper Limahuli Preserve and North Bog using data loggers to assess their flight paths. And what we found was that the Newell shearwaters typically head out from their colonies in a broad arc out to sea, but then when they come back in, they hit the Nepali coast, fly up towards Hanakapiai, cross over to Upper Manoa Valley, and then head up into the colony that way. So that video that we showed at the very beginning of those birds flying along that ridge, that's their main flyway. And all those birds pretty much avoid any power lines at all. The flight paths out, if you were a fledgling heading out, you might be drawn towards the lights of Princeville and Hanalei, but compared to other parts of the island, that's about the only light source you can see from there. And then North Bog with the Hawaiian Petrels, most of the birds were heading out in a sort of broad path. There were two routes coming back in, and one did bring them sort of over Wainiha Valley and the other through Hanakapiai Valley. But they're flying pretty high there too. So, we have a pretty good understanding of their flight paths. And for the most part, most of those birds are flying well above and away from power lines. We did have one bird do a really odd route where it came in at 2 o'clock in the morning and flew straight diagonally across from Lahui across the power line trail to North Bog. I don't know if that was a late bird trying to get back to its chick in a hurry. But that was one bird which definitely did pass over a dangerous area, but it was an anomaly compared to the rest of the birds. So broadly speaking, we can say that the birds going in and out those colonies are as far away from power line collision risk as anywhere on this island, apart from the Nepali coast itself.
And the other part that I heard of Amy's question is flyways, what we know about the flyways. You mentioned Upper Limahuli earlier, but there's a flyway sort of along that Wainiha Ridge. Can you talk a little bit about what you know about the flyways and the conservation sites? You know what I'm asking?
I think I did.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That they fly along Upper Manoa and Upper Limahuli. Yeah. And, the other useful thing about knowing those flyways is also like those flyways, those birds are flying over or directly past things like our social attraction sites. So again, it highlights the usefulness of social attraction to birds in those areas.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on?
I just kind of am curious of just maybe Sherry and Andre to kind of clarify, are there other conservation units out in this area, or are these the only fenced units for all conservation purposes in the area? And what I'm getting at is that these units say that are 300 acres. I'm imagining there's rare plants out there as well. So I'm kind of wondering the play of management as to what the state is responsible for versus what KIUC is responsible for, and how that, because what I'm hearing is this exchange of like, oh yeah, there's deer fence going, oh, okay, great. But who's doing what and where? And if there's additional units, it's just helpful for perspective for us to understand that bigger conservation picture out there and the land management going on. Thanks.
Well, this is Sherry Mann with DOFA. For the Hononapali NAR, we've got ongoing vegetation management and a variety of other fences in there. And that's been happening, and it will continue to happen. In Honopu, that entire project was funded by a third party, and there are significant vegetation management goals for that, including invasive plant suppression and native plant installation. That's part of that project. Clearly, with any of the KIUC related projects on DOFA managed lands, we're expecting a vegetation management component that hasn't been exactly specified at this point, but at a very minimum, incipient species incursion control is at the highest of importance for us. And that includes, Australian tree fern and albizia, which are marching up the mountains, but it also includes a variety of others like different ground species that, move quickly. The other really important factor in vegetation management is rapid ohia death. And it's not very prevalent up in these areas yet. So we're very concerned about the spread of that and what is that going to do to the sort of landscape level vegetation matrix. So in addition to the HCP, we will have special use permits with KIUC, which will specify exactly what we expect, what we want, and the negotiated terms for not only their access and use of the facilities on the lands, but also vegetation control and management.
A little bit later in this presentation, we have very specific proposed management slides at each site. We're strictly focused on seabirds. So, but we do have that outlined for you. I want to do a little bit of a time check here. We have a lot of slides to get through. So maybe we could get through the conservation sites and then pause and take some questions there. Unless something's burning, just so we can get through the material, because we won't be able to talk about this at the site visit.
Would it work if folks put their questions in the chat? I'm monitoring that just so that they don't forget them. And then I can make sure we come back to those later. Would that be helpful? That would help you move faster.
It's okay for me. Is it okay for you?
Yeah, as long as we make sure we cover them. Yeah.
An eye on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
That way you can make tracks.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay. I just want to make sure we get through each site because there's very specific information to each site. So I just want to make sure we have time to cover that. Okay. We've essentially organized them by the type of protection and therefore the type of management. So I just sort of coined this term open management, which is either no protection or partial protection. We have sites, Pohakea, North Bog, Pihea, Hanakoa, and Hanakapiai. Hanakoa, Hanakapiai, no protection. The other three have partial protection. Ungulate fence, full protection from pigs, and it sounds like some partial protection from deer at Honopu and Upper Limahuli. Predator exclusion fencing, full protection from all mammals, and social attraction, which is Honopu PF, Pohakea PF, and Upper Limahuli PF. Okay, next slide. So Pohakea overview, approximately 293 acres. Again, DOFA, DLNR DOFA is the land manager. It's located within Ho'oponopoly Natural Area Reserve. KIUC has been managing this site continuously since 2012. The partial protection here are the wing fences we were talking about, ungulate wing fences we were talking about earlier, combined with steep ridges. Pig protection at this point, sounds like DOFA is working on adding deer protection, which is fantastic. The existing estimated breeding pairs, we talked about a little bit earlier, Newell Shearwater 290 to 464, which represents approximately 23% of the total estimated metapopulation across all the conservation sites combined. Hawaiian petrel 161 to 611, approximately 7% of the estimated metapopulation across all the conservation sites. Past and current management, colony monitoring and population trend monitoring. So we have both call rate change since year 0 and reproductive success rate change since year 0. Year 0 is the first year of conservation management and monitoring at each site. So year 0 is different for the sites, but that represents the first year for management and monitoring. So Andre, I'm going to ask you very briefly to talk about how call rate change is calculated in reproductive success rate change.
This is Andre, Ryan. Yeah, so those are two of our main metrics for assessing the effectiveness of management. So we'll start with reproductive success rate because that's at the burrow level. So we monitor all of the burrows that we find in each site 7 times a year. So we check each burrow, check the contents. Some of the burrows we can get into the back of and see what's actually inside. Others we use visual cues like guano, feathers, scent, that kind of thing, and cameras. And the reproductive success rate is calculated as the number of burrows where breeding was confirmed and where an outcome is known. The number of birds that fledged from those burrows. So that's how we get reproductive success rate. And then call rate is calculated using acoustic sensors. So we use SM4s from Wildlife Acoustics, saw meters. And we record in all the colonies at static sites. There's 10 saw meters in most sites and 14 at Upper Limahuli because it's a bigger site and we've got full coverage there. We collect all that data, the acoustic data, and it's analyzed by conservation metrics in California to get a call rate, which is calls per minute. And then because those are the same area, the same sites that are monitored year after year after year, we can then compare the change in call rate over time. And call rate, we've also had a look at from the perspective of how it's related to the number of burrows on the ground. And there's a significant relationship between call rates and number of burrows within a 250 meter radius of each saw meter. So the more calls there are, the more burrows there are around those saw meters. There's some debate as to what those birds are that are calling, whether they're actual breeding birds or whether they're prospecting and non-breeding birds, but the relationship is there that if there's more birds breeding on the ground, there's more birds calling in the air, and that's a significant relationship. And the great news is that over time, we're seeing a really clear reproductive success rate change where there's a positive, very positive increase in all sites since the first year we started monitoring. And call rates are basically increasing on an annual basis. And all those all that data is presented in our annual reports. And if you look in particular at the call rate changes for sites, you can see almost every single site for both species. As long as there's a lot of species of that species breeding in the site, it's a steady increase year after year as less birds are dying from predators and surviving at sea and then coming back and breeding. So we're clearly seeing the effects of management, positive effects of management over time at all of the sites.
Thanks, Andre. So predator control at Pohakea, past and current management at Pohakea, trapping and removal of cats and rodents, removal of feral bees, which actually is a fairly recent problem, but we are actively doing that over the last few years and will continue to. Removal of barn owls and ungulates removed as needed. We have only had to remove pigs from the sites, but it does sound like DOFA has been removing some ungulates at North Bog. Predator monitoring, game cameras, and acoustic monitoring of barn owls. This is a photo. This is a natural burrow with a monitoring camera there in front of the burrow. I didn't mention photos on the past slides, but okay. Okay, North Bog, approximately 257 acres. Again, this is primarily in Honaonapalinar on DOFA managed land. There is a very small slice of the site that's on private property owned by Burubakal Capital Partners. KIUC has been managing this site since 2012. Again, it's just like Pohakea, it's within the partial protected wing fences along the steep ridges. Estimated breeding pairs, Newell shearwater, 67 to 80. About 5% of the total metapopulation of all the conservation sites, and Hawaiian petrel, 880 to 1,261, about 40% of the total metapopulation of conservation sites. Current and past management, very similar management for predator control and predator monitoring as Pohakea and Pihea. The call rate change since year zero, Newell Shearwater 134.07% increase, Hawaiian Petrel 150.12% increase. Reproductive success change since year zero, Newell Shearwater not applicable. It's not a Newell Shearwater site, primarily Hawaiian Petrels, and a 34% increase for Hawaiian Petrels. Okay, Pihea, approximately 193 acres, also located in Ho'oponopoly on lands managed by DOFA. KIUC has been managing this site also since 2012. Same as North Bog and Pohakea, it's protected by the ungulate fences, wing fences. Existing breeding pairs, 0 to 1 for Newell Shearwater, not a high population of Newell Shearwater there. Hawaiian Petrel, 645 to 815, so approximately 29% of the total estimated metapopulation for all the conservation sites for Hawaiian Petrel. Past and current management, the same as North Bog and Pohakea, and call rate change since year zero, Newell Shearwater 137.15% increase, Hawaiian Petrel 131.83% increase. Reproductive success rate change, Newell Shearwater again, not applicable, but Hawaiian Petrel 49.32% increase. Okay, Hanakoa. Go ahead, Tori, next slide. Thank you. Hanakoa is approximately 179 acres, again, located Ho'oponopoly on lands managed by DOFA. This site was initiated in 2016 with funding provided by ABC, NIFWIF, and a state grant in 2019. The site was managed as mitigation by Kauailoa for 1 year in 2020, and KIUC has been managing it since we started in 2021. There's no fence protection at the site, partial or otherwise. Estimated breeding pairs, Newell Shearwater 45 to 74, so about 3% of the Newell Shearwater metapopulation across all conservation sites. And Hawaiian Petrel 171 to 45 estimated breeding pairs, about 7.5% of the total metapopulation. Past and current management, this is similar to Pohakea and Pihea and North Bog for predator control and predator monitoring. Call rate change, 58.55% increase, Hawaiian Petrel 59.82% increase. Reproductive success, again, Newell Shearwater not applicable here, but for Hawaiian Petrel, 43.4% increase. Hanakapiai. So like Hanakoa, Hanakapiai has no protection, no partial protection or otherwise, located in Ho'oponopoly on lands managed by DOFA. Very similar to Hanakoa, initiated in 2016 from funding provided by ABC, NIFWIF, and a state grant in 2019. Again, this site was managed as mitigation for 1 year by Kauailoa, and we started managing it in 2021. Estimated breeding pairs, Newell Shearwater 76 to 85, about 6% of the estimated metapopulation for the conservation sites, and Hawaiian Petrel 289 to 398, about 13% of the metapopulation. This is again a photo of the old weather port that's being replaced this year. Hanakapiai past and current management, just like Hanakoa. Call rate change since year zero, Newell Shearwater, 172.24% increase. Hawaiian Petrol, 62.20% increase. Reproductive success rate change since year zero, Newell Shearwater, 83% increase, and Hawaiian Petrol, 62.5% increase. So you'll see through all these slides, there's been an increase all across the board at all the sites for both call rate change and reproductive success. We put increase just so there wouldn't be any confusion, but it's been an increase for every site. Okay, Tori, next slide. So again, all of those that we just covered are what I'm calling open management sites, either no protection or partial protection from wing fences, ungulate wing fences. I am going to actually get Kyle to talk with you a little bit. These are two types of traps that we do and will do.
This is Kyle Pius with Halleck's Ecosystem Restoration. So on the left side, that is a live capture cage trap. That is the primary trapping method we run for feral cats in the conservation sites. This one in particular is monitored by a transmitting cellular camera so that we can monitor it remotely. These traps can be either baited or, in this case, this is what we refer to as a blind set trap. So you can't see the other side of the trap, but the other side of the trap is open, and this is placed in a trail, and it allows animals to think they can move through it, and when they trigger it in the middle, they will get captured, and then the camera will take a picture of that, send it to us back in our office, and we would fly in and respond. On the right, you have our primary form of rodent control in the conservation sites, which are good nature A24s. For those who are not familiar, this is a relatively new trapping system that came out of New Zealand probably about 10 years ago now, but they are lethal mechanical traps powered by a CO2 cartridge. There is a pressurized bait capsule in the top that squeezes out new bait on a weekly basis. The rats climb up inside to get the bait, and they push a trigger that activates a piston that blunt force trauma hits them in the head. They drop out, the trap resets, and these can trigger upwards of 24 times before they need a new CO2 cartridge. We check them about every 4 to 6 months. And these are a trap which works best in volume. So they are placed out in grids or in transects, depending on topography. We maintain them at roughly 50-meter spacing between traps. So combined across all the conservation sites, there are grids of hundreds upon hundreds of these traps out through the forest, just suppressing rodents on a landscape scale continuously throughout the year.
Wow. So these are the specific management activities that we would be doing at each site: colony monitoring and population trend monitoring. Andre talked a little bit about that earlier. So burrow monitoring, acoustic call rates and acoustic surveys happening at each conservation site, predator control, trapping and removal of cats and rodents, removal of feral bees and ungulates if needed, and barn owl removal. Predator monitoring, game cameras throughout the site, and acoustic monitoring for barn owls, and then vegetation management on an as-needed basis. So our focus on vegetation management, again, is to limit the spread of invasives around the seabird colonies, and in some cases, the predator exclusion fences, really, we have actually outplanted native plants, but in the open areas, we're really just trying to limit and control the spread of invasives that prevent successful burrowing. Upper Limahuli Preserve. So now we're shifting to ungulate areas that have ungulate fencing and control of pigs and to some degree deer at Honopu. So you can see actually in these two photos, the existing ungulate fence at Upper Limahuli Preserve. Okay, next slide. The site is approximately 418 acres. Primary landowner is National Tropical Botanical Garden. We did talk about earlier, there's a small portion of the site that's in DOFA managed land. KIUC has been managing this site since 2011. Again, the majority is enclosed within that 3.5 mile existing ungulate fence and estimated existing breeding pairs. This is primarily a Newell shearwater site. It's actually our largest, the site with the largest Newell shearwater population, 498 to 617 estimated breeding pairs, about 40% of the estimated metapopulation. And Hawaiian petrel, 112 to 135, about 5% of the total metapopulation. All these metapopulations are just at the conservation sites, not island-wide. So past and current management. Colony monitoring and population trend monitoring, the call rate change since year 0 for Newell shearwater, 74.32%, Hawaiian petrel, 273.6%. Reproductive success rate change since year 0, Newell shearwater, 58%, Hawaiian petrel, 396.5%. Again, that existing infrastructure, the ungulate fence plus weather ports and landing zones, predator control, removal of cats and rodents, and removal of feral bees and barn owls, predator monitoring, game cameras, and acoustic monitoring of barn owls, and vegetation control and fence maintenance. Very similar to the open management sites with the addition of fence management, and also Upper Limahuli in partnership with NTBG. They do more intensive vegetation control there as part of their mission in addition to the seabird conservation. Okay, next slide, please. Honopu. Okay. So the Honopu site, the larger site, this is the area within the ungulate wing fences, approximately 332 acres, located in the Polycona Natural Area Reserve. The site spans lands owned by DOFA and state parks. We will start managing this site this year. The wing fences were constructed by DOFA, DOD, and other partners and are used in combination with steep ridges to prevent ungulates from entering the site. Estimated breeding pairs, Newell shearwater, 90 to 92 estimated breeding pairs, about 7% across all the conservation sites, and Hawaiian petrel. Gosh, it looks like we didn't get
it's 0.
0. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Andre. 0. Okay. Next slide, please. So the Honopu PF, well, Honopu in general is a relatively new site. Ungulate wing fences are likely to be completed this year. Monitoring was initiated in 2013 and then scaled up significantly in 2020. Predator control was initiated in 2018 and then scaled up in 2022. I believe, Sherry, correct me if I'm wrong, the ungulate fence construction started in 2021 and it's roughly 2.4 miles. And happening within the site currently is colony monitoring, predator control, and barn owl monitoring and control. That's a fence on the right there of the ungulate. Sorry, a picture on the right of the ungulate fence. Okay, proposed management. Exactly what's happening now, in addition to the colony monitoring and population trend monitoring, predator control monitoring, and we will also do vegetation management at the sites, both this is for both the ungulate fence sites. Upper Limahuli is within the ungulate fence, an approximate 300 perimeter around the outside of the ungulate fence line. Honopu within the fence, and also that 300-foot perimeter around the fence, the ungulate fence. And we will do in the site at Honopu, we will focus on the areas where seabird burrows are existing now. They are not throughout the entire site at this point. Hopefully they will be one day. But so we'll track, the vegetation management will track the location of burrows as they spread, then the vegetation management would spread. And barn owl control regardless of fencing, because obviously barn owls are not prevented from entering the site by the fences. Upper Limahuli PF. These are two photos from the site feasibility trip that occurred last year. The photo on the right is the existing ungulate fence, which the predator exclusion fence will meet, and a portion of the ungulate fence will be replaced with predator exclusion fencing. Next slide. So landowner is National Tropical Botanical Garden. So Michelle, you asked earlier about the yeah. The yellow line is the entire site. The red line is the ungulate fence. And the purplish pink is the location of the predator exclusion fencing. Yeah. So Andre mentioned earlier, 7 Newell shearwater burrows that we know of around the proposed fence line. This would be a new site. And we're going to have to coordinate very closely with Andre and his team and NTBG and their team on both seabird burrows and rare plants during fence construction, fence line clearing, and fence construction.
This is Lainey Berry from DOFA. Yeah, just a clarifying question on that. So when you say this is the site, which is bigger than the fenced area, so what defines the site then if it's not the fence? Is that where? No, I mean, like what defines where you put the yellow line? Now, what happens inside the yellow line? Is that like where active management occurs?
Yes.
Okay.
That's where active management occurs.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that also the property boundary?
No, the property boundary is actually the red line.
Okay. And so the Upper Limahuli team does the outside the fence
I'm
work?
gonna let Andre tell you specifically what happens outside the fence.
The yellow line is basically just, it was a rough line drawn around areas where we're monitoring within the site and the burrows that are monitored in those areas. NTBG does not manage beyond their boundary, but they have, for example, cat traps at the boundary line, which would impact the birds that are just off there. And it's really just a line of burrows that extends from the southwestern tip along that ridge a little bit. That's really what that entails. It's not, perhaps the line might be a little more exuberant than it needs to be, but yeah.
Yes.
So who owns the property outside the?
DOFA.
So who owns the property outside the boundary of the NTBG?
DOFA. That's part of the DOFA managed land area. Okay, predator exclusion.
I think actually the bit there that's sort of like coming off the south wall, that's just, it's kind of the way that Google Earth and the rough line has imposed. So we don't go anywhere down there. It's impassable. It's impossible to get to. So there are burrows along the edge of the line in the NTBG side, but we don't go. Nobody goes down into that yellow section. That's on that sheer wall. Should probably tidy the line up a little bit, I guess. I should probably tidy it up.
Thank you.
I'm now looking at it from that orientation. Yeah, nobody works that little section there. It's not possible to get to that.
So we can do that and add that into the, when you get the line cleaned up there, we can add that into the revised HCP.
Yep.
Great. Okay, predator exclusion fencing at Upper Limahuli. This will be monitored as a separate site. So Upper Limahuli PF. Pono Pacific is under contract for construction of this fence, which will be approximately 12 acres. We're still refining based on location of existing burrows and rare plants. So there'll be some flux in the total acreage. We should know that, I think, by the end of this year. It's in the northern area of the ungulate fence site. Construction will start this year. I mentioned earlier coordination with ARC for known burrows or unidentified burrows along the fence line, and then NTBG for rare plants or plants of concern. Fence line clearing, we hope to start mid-December through mid-March. Fence line clearing would not happen during the seabird season. Yes, Andre.
Can I just talk a little bit about why we chose this area?
Sure.
Yeah. I think it's important to understand this particular site and the choice behind this one. So Upper Limahuli Preserve is the most important new shearwater site that we have in terms of numbers. But this area is in the very the far north of the site. It's yeah, you can see it right there. And it was heavily impacted by Hurricane Niki, so a lot of the ohias were destroyed. It's there's, you know, in terms of vegetation, it's more of a sort of crude area with some very important plants in it, but it's a pretty devastated landscape. Most of the mules are breeding more to the south, and so it's a low density of birds. And the idea would be to try to attract birds that are transiting, say, on the Hanakapiai side, on those slopes that are unprotected into there, because it's like right on the edge of Hanakapiai. Pulling birds in from below the ungulate fence line of Upper Limahuli, and birds transiting past Upper Manoa. So it's kind of, it's not just pulling in birds from Upper Limahuli. We're trying to get birds from all around the area that are currently unprotected and putting them inside a predator-proof fence, which is obviously the highest level of protection, and that no mammals will be able to get into it. Whereas currently, everywhere else is open management. So there are cats and rats in the area that get removed, but they can still have a small impact. So this would be trying to bring these birds into a much better protected area. And it's an area with not a lot of birds in it at the moment. So that was the kind of the rationale behind that site. And the topography is great for it. It's like a nice bowl with good steep slopes, which is what the mules in particular need to take off. They can't take off from flat land. So they need those sort of like steep areas to take off from. And there's a lot of space in there to put in artificial nest boxes and so on.
So just a little bit of history here on this site. We had originally looked at completely replacing the ungulate fence. Before I started with this program, there was an assessment done back in 2014, 2015, 2016 that proposed a replacement of the ungulate fence. And then last year, we went up with the ARC team and NTBG and Pono Pacific and took a second look at the site, third look, fourth look. And it just is not feasible to replace the ungulate fence. So then we put significant resources into identifying where we could put a predator exclusion fence. So it was just selected towards the end of last year. We hope to have some GIS files on it over the next month. So it's a site actively in development, but at least we have the location at this point in time. So
that's what I was going to ask you to go over, to be honest with you, because there's multiple different configurations that have been explored here, and just a little bit about why you landed on this one. And I think you've talked a little, so you just briefly mentioned the broader extent of the fence around the entire property, or at least around where the current ungulate fence is. Is there any other fence configuration that was considered here for this site?
Yeah, the team flew over the whole site. There are other options at the site. This was the site we selected as the best, but yes, there are other areas at Upper Limahuli that could be fenced. This was the preferred site.
Yeah, and it's important to note that the initial fence assessment was done by a contractor, an independent contractor, but we never actually had a fencer on the ground. And that's something that I have been saying for many years, is that we need to have someone who's actually going to build the fence go to the site and have a look to see if it's feasible. And when we eventually got the fencer out to the site, he was looking at it like, what? Like a predator-proof fence around this? And so, that this is Pono Pacific saying that it's a predator-proof fence. Just the predator-proof fence is not feasible on those ridges. And when you look at the footage and the photographs, I mean, you can understand why, right? Like, this is very narrow ridges. Predator-proof fences are big structures that require a lot of clearing. And so Pono Pacific said that that was not possible. So we did assess that. Another thing to also consider in terms of placing fences is bird burrows. And so, like I said, as we get further to the south, there's more and more newels on the fence line itself. Lots of them, in fact. And so you start getting into a situation where you can potentially build a fence in some of those other areas, but you're going to take out loads of burrows in the process because the birds like those areas where the fence can go. So that's another nice thing about the area we've currently got, is that there just aren't many birds in that section.
This is Kyle Pius, and one other thing that Pono Pacific mentioned about the difficulty or the infeasibility of building on these ridges is the predator-proof fences require fairly large holes to be augured for the post to be set in, and there's a good potential of destabilizing the entire ridge lines by putting those holes in. And so it would not only just be logistically difficult, you would potentially be impacting the stability of those ridge lines and causing landslides or collapses with the fence installation there.
Kavika's had his hand up for a while. Can we go to Kavika?
Sure. Kavika, go ahead with your.
Thank you. So Andre, I guess this is a question for you. With the short-term HCP, way back in the early days with Nick Holmes, and then I think maybe when you were managing the Endangered Species Recovery Project, the seabird one, I thought there were old artificial burrows that Nick Holmes put in, and then newer ones that were put in more recently. I'm curious about, I thought, weren't they on the center ridge going down to the proposed predator-proof fence, or were there any up in that area?
So there were a small number of artificial nest boxes that were put in the area we call Nesh Ridge, which I don't know if I can point it out on the map. Tori, I don't know if you can get that pointer. It's this area that the pointer is here, roughly, kind of in the center of Upper Limahuli Preserve. And I think it was something like 7 nest boxes that went in experimentally. The birds didn't like that design. They never used those nest boxes. They were plastic ones that are similar to the ones that are in the old ones that are in Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge, not the Nahoku ones, but the old ones in Kilauea, and the birds don't particularly like those ones either. So I don't know why they didn't like those, but it was just a small number of burrows that went in there. We did put a lot of burrows into Upper Manoa in the proposed site there, and these are wooden nest boxes, and those are the same ones that have now gone into Poakea. They're the same ones that are used at Nahoku and the same ones that are used at Hanapu. I don't know if that answers
okay,
successfully in that it.
The second generation went into Upper Manoa, not Upper Limahuli. Okay, so and are those proposed to go within the predator-proof fence and with some social attraction?
Yeah, exactly. And currently, currently the ones at Nahoku now have, as of last year, there were 3 pairs of uau breeding in them and 1 fledged chick. So the birds are definitely using, at least the uau are using those nest box designs. And those are the same designs that were used in New Zealand and for similar species, similar puffinus species.
I want to do a time check. How are you going for time length? Because we need to wrap up by 30 minutes.
Molly, yeah, I think we're doing okay. Yep.
Yeah, we have been holding questions too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we might want to, I don't know if people want to take a break. Maybe I need a break.
You want to? If I could say one more thing about the fencing, just to be fully responsive to Michelle's request, we did also assess, and we actually, I should say, to some degree, still are finishing the assessment on cat proofing the ungulate fence at Upper Limahuli because we couldn't do the predator exclusion. And it is feasible to cat proof the existing fence. What is not feasible is to close the fence completely. There are sections of the fence where it's just a super steep ridge line. It's not a fully enclosed fence. And we can't, there's no way to fence and cat proof those areas. So at this point, it's looking unlikely that we'll do the cat proofing, but that is another type of assessment that we have done at Upper Limahuli. So I just wanted to close the loop on that. And then we want to take a break now, Lainey?
If this is a good time for a break. Sure. Yeah, maybe a 10-minute break. Sound good? Okay. I just Hi, everyone. We're going to start again. So if the committee can take their seat. Thank you.
You need help from a teacher voice?
Maybe. Everyone, just a housekeeping. I think we're going to, we've got a lot of material still to go through, but we do have, thank you. We do have an agenda and we have to be at those stops this afternoon at those exact times. So we're going to try and move things along, and we're going to finish up here at 12:30, then go take a lunch break, and then be at the first spot at 1:30 on time. So just keep that in mind. Thank you. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay. So just to remind everybody where we are in the presentation, we're talking about the Upper Limahuli Preserve Predator Exclusion Fence, or the PF site. Kavika was asking earlier, we are going to do social attraction at the site once the fence is completed. So we'll do fence construction, predator eradication, then we'll install artificial burrows, set up the sound system, and be off and running. Colony monitoring and population trend monitoring, and predator control is a little bit different inside the predator exclusion sites because we are eradicating all mammalian predators. Most of the focus in predator control will be monitoring the inside and outside along the fence lines and being prepared for rapid responses in the event that we have breaches. And then, of course, barn owl control will continue at these sites, and removal of feral bees will continue. We talked a little bit about vegetation management on the ungulate fences, both along the fence line and the border. It is the same with the predator exclusion fencing. Okay, next slide, please. Pohakea PF. So again, this is a site, these are all pictures of the existing Pohakea predator exclusion fence constructed by DOFA, DOD, and other partners. The site is operating currently. KIUC started management last year, 2022. Okay, it's approximately 3/4 of an acre in the northern portion of the larger Pohakea site. Again, landowner DOFA. The site is advantageous for social attraction because it's a close proximity to a large breeding cluster of Newell shearwater. So social attraction here is specifically focused on Newell shearwater. It's located on a flyway for Newell shearwater and a steep bowl topography to allow nesting. It's a very steep site. No known natural burrows within the PF, but there in the photo on the right, you can see that's an artificial burrow with a monitoring camera in front of it. Hopefully you can see in the photo the entrance here and the burrow there. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, again, KIUC took over management of the site in 2022. Social attractions started at this site in 2022. We are very excited to report that we have already had birds investigating the site, 33 Newell shearwater and 1 Hawaiian petrel captured on camera. You can see there on the right, that's actually a bird at the social attraction site. I think we covered the rest of this. This is past and current management, but this type of management will continue going forward. Next slide. Proposed management summary here. The photos on the right are when we first started management of the site, we did some adjusting of the nesting boxes. Those are the photos there on the right. And I think we covered everything else on this slide, so we can continue forward. Honopu PF, that's the predator exclusion fence at Honopu there in the foreground on the photo. And there it is again in the right photo. It's approximately 3.3 acres inside of the larger ungulate wing fences at Honopu. Covers the northern edge of the conservation site overlooking the cliffs of Honopu Valley. Landowner is DOFA for this site. Honopu, the larger site, DOFA and State Parks, but the predator exclusion fence is all on DOFA land. And we will be taking over the management of the site in 2023. Close proximity to large breeding colonies, cliffside topography, and no known burrows at this site at this time. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. More fence photos. Predator eradication was completed in 2022. Next slide, please. Past and current management. Relatively new site, predator exclusion fence and predator eradication completed in 2022. April of 2021, 41 artificial burrows were installed in one section for band rump storm petrel and 29 artificial burrows for Newell shearwater and Hawaiian petrel. This is the only conservation site we have with social attraction for and nesting boxes specific for band rump storm petrel. Social attraction initiated in 2022. Same as with the Pohakea site, we've already had birds investigating the site. 4 Newell shearwater sighted on camera. You can see there one on the right. Okay, colony and artificial burrow monitoring, population trend monitoring, predator control along the border of the fence and the 300 buffer acre outside the fence, and barn owl monitoring and control. Next slide, please. Proposed management, the same as what's going on now. In addition to fence line maintenance, repair, and replacement as needed. We will be doing the predator eradication at the Upper Limahuli site, but for Pohakea and Honopu PFs, that has already been completed by others. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, back up just a little bit. So the photo on the right is the social attraction set up there at Honopu. Okay. PF sites, proposed management. These are actually, just pause here for a second. These are cameras monitoring the fence line. You can also see a good nature trap there on one of the posts. But this is the type of monitoring that we'll be doing at the around the fence line at the predator exclusion fences. Okay, next slide. This is actually, I think this might be you, Kyle, trimming a tree branch before it falls onto the fence there at Honopu. So fence maintenance is a very important part of the future management at these sites to prevent fence breaches. Next slide, please. Okay, site 10. Again, the original site, Upper Manoa, became infeasible. We just could not reach agreement with the landowner. So this year in 2023, we are doing site assessment for potential sites. And then by the end of the year, we will select one site, the best site for site 10. Andre, I don't know if you could just very briefly talk about the exploratory surveys in 2023 here.
Yeah, so for site 10, because we need to find this as quickly as possible by the end of the year, KIUC wants to make a decision. So it's going to be a very intensive series of exploratory surveys. We're going to have a team of 2 who are dedicated to just doing that work. And they're going to go to multiple sites that we've had a look at once we get landowner agreement. Multiple times doing auditory surveys at night to map where the birds are with a particular focus on Newell shearwater. They're also going to deploy sound meters and cameras at the sites too and recover them on their last trip. So by the end of that, by the end of the year and by the end of September, really, which is when all the surveys will be over because the birds stop calling around then, we should have a good handle on which sites have the most Newell shearwater and what those sites look like in terms of feasibility management.
I want to say a little bit about your part of the feasibility.
Sure. This is Kyle Pius. We'll also be coordinating with ARC on those exploratories to assess the sites for feasibility of predator control. And we'll be deploying cameras to assess baseline predator presence, and also looking at the feasibility of actually deploying trap lines for both cats and rodents across the sites.
Also, part of that feasibility, we're going to work with Pono Pacific to go to the sites and determine whether fencing is feasible at the potential sites that we've shortlisted. And I'll be working with the landowners to make sure that the landowners are supportive and amenable. That'll be a critical criteria for us on Site 10. We are shooting for the same or greater benefits as what we were modeling for Upper Manoa based on historical data collected at Upper Manoa. We'll know more about that later this year. Okay, I think let's go to the next slide, Tori. Band rump storm petrel. So right now, the band rump storm petrel, they are not known to currently breed in the conservation sites. We do have social attractions set up for band rump storm petrel at Honopu PF. Acoustic surveys indicate the colonies are present in Waimea Canyon and along the cliffs at Nepali coast. Proximity to the conservation sites where band rump storm petrels are known to occur. Some of the predator control that we do for the conservation sites benefits band rump storm petrel, and that is barn owl control and cat control because of the proximity of their location to the conservation sites. And then we're also going to do monitoring for band rump storm petrel along the Nepali coast. And I think the next slide, Andre, might be you talking about this a little bit more.
Yes, so the Nepali coast is an area where, which is not covered by long-term radar monitoring because of the steepness of the terrain, no accessible roads, et cetera, et cetera. So we've actually been deploying sound meters, acoustic sensors at multiple locations along the Nepali for about 10 years now. That's an example of one of the acoustic sensors there, and those little Easter egg baskets that we created. Where the idea is you just basically land, well, we used to hover the helicopter over ridges and lower them with a grappling hook down using the box. And then we were no longer allowed to do that. So now I have to actually get out the helicopter and scramble along and put them out in those boxes, which seems a little less safe. But anyway, so we're through KIUC, we'll be deploying 20 sound meters along the Nepali to assess population change over time for mule shearwater and band rump storm petrel, which both breed in the cliffs along the Nepali. And we don't have any burrows in those areas because you can, as you can see, the birds basically breed in the top third of those cliff faces, which are inaccessible to humans, but not to goats. And so we use acoustic sensors to measure population trends in those areas.
Okay, thanks, Andre. Next slide, Tori.
John, before we go on, Jim had a question. Would you mind?
Sure.
And he was about to step out. Jim, are you still there to ask your question? Okay, we'll come back. He had to step out for 30 minutes, but he'll be back.
Okay, can you flag me when he returns? Thank you. Okay, landowner agreements, a very important part of ensuring that KIUC has access and that the sites are protected for the 50-year term. We have been working with all the landowners. They're in various states of process in terms of draft agreements and discussions towards draft agreements. We have one executed agreement in place. One key component of the landowner agreements is that they would provide KIUC access throughout the entire 50-year term. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to switch to KIUC minimizations. So we're going to pause here and take questions on anything that has to do with conservation sites.
So I know Kavika had been holding a question earlier. Kavika, I don't know if you had that one answered earlier, or was that the question you asked, or do you have another one?
I got one, definitely. I actually have several, so thank you.
Go ahead.
One of them was a over our 30,000 foot overview question, kind of about the relationship between the short-term HCP and the long-term HCP, because there were a lot of minimization, reflectors put in under the short-term HCP, and there's a bunch that are proposed in the long-term. I'm just curious. My first question is, I'm curious about the maintenance of those reflectors. Does the long-term HCP cover maintenance of all the reflectors that were ever put in?
Yes, throughout the long-term HCP, we would be replacing both reflective diverters and LED diverters as needed through the term of the permit.
Okay, thank you. And then my other one, so what my very first question I asked about the top wire only reflectors on Powerline Trail versus the all wires in other sections of the island, and I asked where you guys could point me to read more about that, and you said chapter 4 and 5, which wasn't entirely helpful, but I think I found it was in section 4.4.1. I didn't see any articulation of this top wire only approach. I did see a percentage that I'm assuming was used for calculation. There were no formulas listed or any modeling. I'm just concerned that which percent success you're using to calculate. Is it one success rate across all wires, or is there a more nuanced formula? And there's pointed to appendix 4, or it was referenced appendix 4B, but when I look in appendix 4B, there's no indication of whether these are top line only or all lines or anything like that. So a bit concerned.
Okay, so I will try to address some of that, or I'll address as much of that as I can. So the estimated efficacy is per span, not per line. And right now we're using the estimated efficacy, or I shouldn't say efficacy, the estimated strike reduction of 90% per span specific to LED diverters. We at the end, once there have been 3 years of monitoring, after all the LED diverters are installed, we will have 3 years of monitoring to back check whether that estimated strike reduction is correct or not. And at that point, we'll make an adjustment. So if it needs to be adjusted. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. So is that going to be covered in an adaptive management section? I'm still concerned that 90% across the top line only of Powerline Trail is overly optimistic, and I'm not sure that's wise to plan for that. But
that is covered in adaptive management. There are specific triggers for not meeting. So the trigger is with the island-wide 65%, and there are triggers specific to not meeting that. So if through the monitoring we get indications that we're likely to, three things could happen. We could be right on target for the estimated strike reduction for all the different types, or we could be too low or too high. So as the data comes in over the 3 years after the minimization has been implemented, we'll be tracking that data. And if we get an indication, then we will be adjusting the minimization plan to account for that falling short, if that's the case.
Okay, I'll look more into this. It looks like it's chapter 6. Thank you.
Okay. Adaptive, yeah, the specific triggers of adaptive management are in chapter 6. I think Lainey, you had a...
Oh, are you done, Kavika? Or do you have more?
No,
okay. I had a follow-up question about that. Sorry, I wasn't clear. You're saying 90% reduction but that's for all wires, but you're only doing the top wire. So how do
It's
you?
per span. It's
Right.
Per span. Yeah.
Right. What's that?
They disproportionately.
Yeah, I understand that, but wasn't the 90% assuming all the wires would be
No.
covered? No?
No, the 90% was assuming top wire coverage. What we're learning, so some short-term monitoring was done.
Yeah.
And we have the results from that, which Mark spoke to earlier. He got about a 50%.
56, yeah.
So once we, over the 3 years, because we want to account for annual variation in the monitoring. So over that 3 years of monitoring, we'll see whether it falls in within that 56% or if it comes in higher, and then we'll adjust accordingly.
Okay. But the 90% didn't come from here, right?
No,
Yeah.
it was based on off-island data.
So it
We
seems,
didn't have, when we first started with the LEDs, we didn't have on-island data.
yeah.
So
So it might be optimistic.
it could be.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, a quick follow-up on that. I did a quick search and I want to just commend you that the only publications I can find on power lines and seabirds are coming, lead author Rain, right? So thank you for putting that out there, but it also raises a concern that as far as publications out there, it's entirely coming out of this operation. I don't know if there's other, like the other data that you're citing of the 90%. I don't know if we have access to that publication or that's yours.
That's the South Africans on bustards.
On
And-
bustards, so totally different species, totally different system. And it seems, I think it's a bit problematic to use a super high estimate like that with a 3-year delay when we know that we're 15 years from hitting bottom and coming up. Like every year really counts. And so I think it's problematic to use a 90% when your initial things suggest 56% and it's a very different system. So just want to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that comment. I understand the concern. I mean, at the time, the paper was all we had to use. So part of our goal in monitoring is to focus on high strike areas in the monitoring. So hopefully the data will be coming in sooner. I think the first year of data after all the LED diverters are installed will help guide us towards whether we need to do additional minimization or if we're on target in the right direction. But I hear your concern and I understand.
There's a long line, it's not move down.
Any more? Go ahead.
Okay. If there aren't any other follow-up questions along that line. So just a quick question, snares deployed inside, or are snares deployed inside the partially effective pig exclusion fences?
Snares for, yes, there's predator control, but snares any specific to any species or?
But they're usually pigs. They're usually in pigs.
Yeah.
Want to talk about pigs?
Yeah, so the KIUC snaring effort is in coordination with DOFA's and NEPAM's existing snaring efforts within the Hononapali. So KIUC operated snares are run at Pohakea, Pehea, and I believe some at Hanakoa, and DOFA and NEPAM runs snares at a variety of other sites throughout the NAR.
On the list here. Okay, and there were large confidence intervals in some of the estimates, and just briefly, what can be done to narrow some of those as far as the estimates of the number of birds at a site? Again, given that big down and then up that we're expecting.
I mean, it's very hard to get population estimates for, like I said, for nocturnal species that's breeding in those remote settings and habitats, and they're also very secretive. They nest in small holes in the ground, so I don't think an estimate, a difference between the low and the high is unusual for a species such as that. It's the best we could do with the best available data, and in the current monitoring regime that we've got with auditory surveys once a year, covering large areas, I mean, I think I would consider that relatively acceptable for that kind of population estimate. We did also use acoustic sensors to create population estimates as well in the past, but we found that those created estimates that were more variable.
So I'm hearing not really an option for tightening up the confidence intervals then at this point. Okay. Okay. And then how, in a number of places you had an increase in the call rate, but there was no breeding, or there was insignificant breeding at the site. Can you help me interpret that?
Yep.
What that means?
So reproductive success comes from burrows, monitored burrows, and acoustic sensors come from calling birds. And so some of those places have only a few burrows or 1 or 2 burrows that we're monitoring for. It's mainly mules, but there are mules calling in the air. And so we can get increasing call rates from the acoustic sensors, but we can't get any indication on reproductive success because we haven't found the birds yet. And they're particularly difficult in places like North Bog and Hanakoa, where we know there's pockets of those birds because we can hear them when we're doing the auditory surveys. We get them on the acoustic sensors, but they're on cliff walls or 100-foot drops, and we just can't access the birds. And so we can't get any change in reproductive success rate because we're not monitoring them. And so we have to use the acoustic sensors only as a indicator of change. But those birds are being affected by management because rat traps are right against the wall. Cats that are moving around these areas are being trapped. Barn owls are being removed. Pigs are being removed. Okay.
Okay, so it's suggestive of an increase in reproductive rate at that site. It's not just birds flying over, but you just can't confirm because you can't confirm an increase in burrows.
Correct. And when you watch transiting birds, and Mark can attest to this, like when he's at the Powerline Trail, the birds are very quiet. They don't call very often when they're transiting, and they start picking up their calls as soon as they get to their colonies. So you've got a lot of calling in a colony, but very little to know. I mean, my house is on a transit route, and very occasionally a mules will wake me up in the middle of the night, and I'll say thank you very much, and it moves on. But it's an extremely rare occurrence for transits.
Okay. I don't know if there's any other in-room questions.
No, but maybe check the.
Yeah, there's one new one. Okay, Jim's back. So I'll ask Jim's question. The management response by both species of seabirds is extremely impressive, as seen with increases in both call rates and nesting success. Over time, as these populations will potentially increase to higher levels, do you expect an increase in take for these species for both KIUC and other HCP participants, e.g. light attraction stresses the importance of increasing efforts for effective minimization and avoidance actions?
We talk in tomorrow's presentation, we speak specifically to how the model accounts for increases in take potentially associated with increases in population size. I just will say briefly here that just a reminder that the conservation sites, because of the location and the flight routes that the birds take to get to them, the risk from power lines and lights is far less. There is some small risk, but it's far less. So we don't expect dramatic increases in take for birds at the conservation site. Do you want to say anything else about that today, David, or just cover it tomorrow? Okay, we're going to cover it tomorrow. I hope that's okay. Jim, are you going to be here with us tomorrow?
Yes, I will. Thanks a lot. And we can talk a bit more about it then. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
And one last question. We know, like, whenever you build a fence, whether it's an ungulate fence or a predator exclusion fence, there's a trade-off between size and effectiveness, because you can only, it takes a long time to eradicate from a larger fence and, ensuring there's not incursions, but the smaller the fence, the smaller the number of animals protected. So I'm just wondering where you see that, like how you've hit that trade-off here. Do you feel like the fences could be bigger? Some of those look a little bit small, but is it just because of terrain? Like, I just remember from the previous presentation that we're really putting all our eggs in these 10 baskets and expecting the rest of the populations to disappear because they're closer to light attraction areas. And so just wondering if we're doing the absolute best we can with the size of these. Take it as you want. I'm just putting the question out there.
I'll just say briefly at a high level, we don't really want to go much larger than that site at Upper Limahuli. We do have concerns about predator eradication on larger sites. We also know from the data that we've shared with you today and we'll also cover tomorrow that management in open management areas without any protection is successful. We know that. You know, some of the issues, there is the issue of stochastic events with, especially with cats that happen, but we also see pretty quick recovery after that. And so yes, it is a balancing act, because we know management is successful in those open areas, and because we do have concerns about larger fencing sites. We like the smaller sites with the predator exclusion fence. We didn't construct, you know, Honapu and Pohakea. We are very grateful to be able to take over the management of those, but specific to Upper Limahuli and Site 10, we want to keep them relatively small. So I don't know, Andre, if you want to say anything else about that.
Yeah, I mean, some of the fences are pretty small. Like Pohakea is a very small fence, but these are species that can nest in really dense concentrations, and so we would expect within those sites, even if they're smaller, that they would have a much higher density than they would have outside, because they're going to be completely protected from mammalian predators, and they'll be in the most managed areas of all. So I think you know, fences can be bigger, but then you get, like Don was saying, that trade-off where the bigger the fence, then the more likely a breach is going to occur, and the quicker, the harder it's going to be to re-eradicate predators. So it's that kind of trade-off. Pohakea is a small fence, but it can probably fit quite a lot of birds into it.
I don't want to get into the bowels of the model here, but can you talk a little bit about the relative reproductive success you expect to see in a predator-proof fence versus that in an open predator-controlled managed area without a predator control fence? So maybe like the difference that you expect to see between Upper Limahuli in the fence versus Upper Limahuli in the ungulate fence, but outside of the predator-proof fence.
I think that's a population dynamics model question, John, or? Got to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is John Brandon. I'm a biometrician for ICF working on population dynamics models. Stand up. Hello. Okay. Sorry. Right. So the what we start with are predation rate estimates from the burrow monitoring. Then in the model of population dynamics, so we apply those outside of the predator exclusion fence for the open management areas. Inside the predator-proof fence, we set the terrestrial predator predation rates to 0. We keep barn owl predation rates as they are. So those are assumed to be the same across the board, whether you're in a management area or not. And that's basically it. So reproductive success rates go up a little bit, given that benefit there. Go ahead, Andre. Yeah. Let me know if I'm forgetting something.
This is Andre. I have more to add. The other thing is like, you know, in an open managed site, as time progresses and you get more and more birds and cats come in and they get removed, you have more of a chance of a cat killing larger numbers of birds in a short period of time in an open managed site, whereas that's not going to happen in a predator-proof fence site. So the additional benefit, as well as losing all the, you know, you're getting no failures due to mammalian predators, is you're also not being exposed to those occasional catastrophic events which are going to strike in an open management site, but aren't going to occur in a predator-proof fence.
So can I summarize and just see if I'm accurate?
Before you summarize, I just want to add one piece to be confirmed by John. So how we accounted for stochastic cat events in the reproductive success rates in the open management areas is we used reproductive success rates over a period of time that included stochastic cat events. Hopefully that made sense.
So I swear this isn't a rhetorical question. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding and that the group is understanding this difference, right? So what I would assume, given what you've just said, is that in any given year, the reproductive success rate for an area inside the predator-proof fence versus outside of the predator-proof fence could be the same. or close. However, the area outside the predator-proof fence has a higher likelihood of stochastic events and a cat coming in and just wiping out 11 burrows in a night, which we've actually seen before.
No, because inside the managed site, you're still going to have some
Predation.
kills. So your reproductive success rate is going to be lower.
Okay.
So that is factored into the model, is that in the control areas, there'll be a reduced reproductive success rate which is still way higher than outside of any managed areas.
Right.
Then on top of that, you don't have those stochastic events.
Okay. And that the management inside the ungulate fence, but outside the predator-proof fence is more labor intensive.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Kavika has system based. I could read his question, or he can just unmute and say it.
Kavika, you want to ask your question now?
Yeah, sure. So I'm looking, this is back to the power line collision mitigation. So I'm looking at table 6.2. And for conservation measure number 1, implementing power line collision minimization projects, there are 9 triggers listed for adaptive management, but there is not one, as I thought I heard you say earlier, about not meeting the 65% reduction rate. So did I misunderstand you, or did you guys forget to put that one in here?
Sorry, Kavika, I think maybe we misdirected you. It's in the compliance monitoring table. And could you maybe find the page, Tori, and we could, oh, okay. Kavika, we're looking for the table to point you to now. If you could give us just a second here, we'll pull up a.
I'm open to the possibility that I'm not looking at the right table, but nonetheless, it seems like that should be an adaptive management trigger if you don't meet that, would it not?
I had in my memory that it was, the 65% was one of our triggers. So the team is looking now.
Okay, thanks.
The 65% reduction, so we don't use the.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to pass the mic on to Ellen Berryman.
Hi, this is Ellen. So what the trigger is that the anticipated take levels or strike levels are higher, that the actual measured strike levels are higher than anticipated. And the reason for that would be that the minimization was not as effective as we had hoped it would be. So we don't have a 65% reduction per se. We use that 65% reduction to determine how many strikes we would anticipate from one year to the next. So we will look at our anticipated numbers of strikes against the actual number of strikes. And if the actual is exceeding the anticipated, then we know that we haven't minimized enough.
And so wouldn't that then be a trigger?
Yes.
So which of the 9 are listed in table 6.2 would that be relating to?
Looking up right now, Kavika, give us just a minute here. Once we locate the table and the page.
That's how many strikes we have.
Table 6.3, the very first.
Table 6.3, the first conservation measure. And just for time here, I think we could pick this up, Kavika, more tomorrow if we need to, but I think we've got some minimization slides here to go through and SOS also. So
okay. Thank you.
Very, very quickly, this is an important piece, minimization, so I don't want to really run through this too quickly, but we're going to talk about it more this afternoon. So I am going to be abbreviated. So we're basically using 5 different types of minimization: bird flight diverters, two types, reflective and LED. Static wire. We're going to see reflective diverters in the field today and talk about the difference between the two in a little more detail this afternoon. Static wire removal, reconfiguration, which is basically a changing of the design of lines, the configuration of the lines in the air. undergrounding and undergrounding. The estimated strike reductions that we've been talking about and also our take estimate were derived by ARC. So I'm going to ask Mark to very, very briefly talk about the Bayesian model, which is not a brief subject, but he's going to sum it up for you briefly.
I will do my best. This is Mark. So we had a sampling design that so we subsampled. We put acoustic sensors on the power poles, but we couldn't do all power poles on the island, and we couldn't do them for the whole season. So we had to develop a sampling design that accounted for different structure in the environment that would influence collisions and different types of power lines at different heights and different numbers of wires. And that needed to be modeled to account for the time when we weren't listening and for the strikes that are missed because the acoustic system isn't perfect. And so, the Bayesian tool is the tool that we use, and there's many different modeling options, but this is what we're going with. And so it accounts for missed time, missed strikes in various different, very complicated ways that I will not get into.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
So the decisions regarding what type of minimization to use where, that largely came from the estimated strike reductions and the power line strike data that we received from ARC through the Bayesian model. We also considered locations of lines, high strike zones, ability to access, proximity to residential and roadways, and then technology or methods of installation. We talked a little bit about that earlier on power line trail. Photo on the right is power lines in Wailua, and you can see the reflective diverters there on, those are actually installed on multiple layers on those spans. Next slide. Some of this is this is the same slide. Somehow we got two slides. Thank you. Okay, so minimization is happening island-wide. Reflective diverters, this is by the end of 2022, we had installed reflective diverters on 1,395 spans, LED diverters on 70 spans, static wire removal on 658 spans, reconfiguration conducted on 45 spans, and undergrounded 7 spans. This is a map showing where each minimization type has occurred. And in many situations, it's multiple types of minimization. We often pair reflective diverters with static wire removal or LED with static wire removal. The pink, in case you cannot see the code here, it's a little bit hard, I think, to see. The pink is diverter installation for LEDs only. Black is LED plus static wire removal. Blue is reflective diverters. Pink is a combination of reflective diverters, reconfiguration, and static wire removal. Orange is a combination of reflective diverters and static wire removal. And green is reconfiguration, static wire removal. And yellow, static wire removal only. Red is undergrounding. So you can see it's been across the island. There's more to do in 2023. And then by the end of 2023, we will have completed the minimization plan as proposed. Again, once minimization monitoring comes in, we may be adjusting depending on what we learned from the monitoring.
Can I ask what figure number this is in which chapter where this is? What figure number this is that we're seeing on the...
This is only for the PowerPoint presentation, but we can add it into...
There are figures that show these techniques separately. So we have a figure that shows reflective diverters in chapter 4, and then one for static wire removal in chapter 4, and a separate one for reconfiguration in chapter 4. So they're broken up slightly differently than this figure, but they're by the type of minimization.
So it's not an overlay of everything combined. We can add this. That's not a problem. It's fine to add.
Just for perspective, did you mention the total number of spans on the island?
I did not.
A little over 1,700.
Thank you, Mark.
That we're monitoring.
That have been minimized.
That's long distance transmission, major power lines, long distance transmission, and going up the up Coquet there, that's distribution, but it's a major power line.
You were asking total number of spans that have been minimized, or total number of, okay, total number on the island.
That's over 80% have now been modified.
I'm gonna say that again on the microphone.
Over 80% have now been modified.
Thanks. Okay, next slide. These are just really photos to illustrate what a reconfiguration looks like. This was in the central region of Kauai, Kilohana to Hanahanapuni. This is before the reconfiguration. You can see that the wires, the transmission lines are stacked vertically, 3 layers. Next slide. This is during the reconfiguration. You can see in the photo on the left, you can see on the right-hand side, the vertical stacking in 3 layers. And then on the left-hand side of the pole, you can see the horizontal cross arm, which drops those layers down into a horizontal layer as opposed to the stacked vertical. So that's what we mean when we say reconfiguration. You can't see it here in this photo, but this section also had static wire removed. Okay, I'm gonna turn this over to you, Mark. Talk about before and after here.
Okay, so in the background there, you can see the old configuration of wires. So it has a static wire on top, that's position A, and you can see it's been removed in the foreground. So that's one hazard removed, and that was in this area, that's by far the biggest hazard, that top wire. And then you've taken 6 transmission wires that are arrayed vertically and put them horizontally into 2 layers. So you've removed hazards that birds can fly at and lowered the wires significantly. That's B. And then down at C, we've taken 3 layers of distribution wires and also put them into a single layer. So again, removing hazards birds can fly at directly. And then D, that's fiber optic cable, and that has not been changed in this area.
Thank you. Okay, I think the next thing we have available for you is a video just showing avoidance for diverter avoidance, basically. And I'm gonna, Mark, maybe you want to talk people through the videos.
We're gonna do the LED first. Oh yeah. So maybe we can we put the, yep. Oh, yep. Easy.
Try this as a straight screen share. Yeah. There it is.
In the middle. Yeah. Always right. Can we have a laser pointer for the people that can't see me right now?
I was in power.
Oh, okay, never mind. Well, this is power line trail. There's LED diverters on the static wire and on the top transmission wire. And that was a Newell shearwater. We go back to the Newells and just explain it first. So you're going to see the Newells come in. It's flying at the top transmission wire. So layer 2 is what we call it, working from top to bottom, from right to left. Sort of, yes, at this spot. And so this is an extremely dark location. You can only see anything because of the near infrared and the night vision. So the bird is moving in pure black, no light at all, flying at the top transmission wire. And you'll see about 15 meters out, it clearly detects the diverters and then adjusts by increasing its wing beats and goes up and over pretty easily. Right there, up and over. And the next one is a Hawaiian petrel near the coast. So this has reflective diverters. And so in an area with reflective diverters, there's ambient light pollution. So that bird could see them relatively easily and made a very easy turnaround there. And then I think this is going to be Nene. Very big. They went from halfway down the power poles to up and over pretty easily. This video makes it lighter and easier to see than in reality. They can sometimes go through. Most birds that fly directly at wires actually make a successful avoidance. But yeah, they were in all scenarios here compared to what we see birds do without diverters on the wires. They're reacting sooner, they're getting up quicker, and they're getting over more easily.
Do they always go up, or do they ever try to go under?
They go through sometimes, but that's because they've detected too late. That's when there are no diverters on. A lot of birds we see actually go through, and they just sort of wobble their way through if successful.
Right, or not successful.
Right. Yeah, but their preference is to go up.
Mark, could you talk a little bit about the observer surveys at Powerline Trail, because we talked about that earlier, what you actually observed in terms of birds going up and over versus birds that tried to go under?
So that video that we saw of the Newells on Powerline Trail, that's in an area where the terrain's relatively flat. So most birds are flying at the upper wires, and they almost always go up and over if they can detect the hazard. In southern Powerline Trail, there's deep valleys. So a lot of birds are just flying underneath the power lines, and they can be successful if they're flying underneath. But if they get too close to the bottom wires, they actually flare up into the array. So because their natural reaction is to go up. But when the diverters are on, the birds have, in every scenario we've seen, the birds detect the hazard and move up and over, or they can bend sideways and fly along the wires until they get enough flight speed to go up and over. So that they've been successful at avoiding the wires with diverters on Powerline Trail.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. I think that's it for minimization. During the presentation, we're going to talk more about minimization this afternoon. Do we have more questions in the chat, Melissa? Okay. Any more questions from anybody before we shift to SOS?
I do have a question. So I'm looking at figure 18 in appendix 5D. And I just wanted a sense of if this shows the 1700 spans you were talking about. It's the acoustic strike rate.
Yes, that's all locations of all wire spans. Yes.
Okay.
And color coded with the estimated annual number of strikes for each span. Yes.
Okay. So that's 1700 spans, of which 1300 have had minimization efforts done on them.
I don't have a total number of spans for minimization at the end of 2022. Could you go back to that slide? Oh, we can't use that slide because some of that is a combination of spans. You know what? I'll look up I'll look that up for you, Lisa, and I'll get it back to you tomorrow. I do actually have a number somewhere. I just don't have it on the top of my head
I'm just
for minimized spans.
trying to make sure I understand which spans, the numbers of spans we talk about in text and then seeing the maps and making sure they
Yep.
match.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you tomorrow on the minimized spans number.
Thanks.
Or actually, I'll try to look it up before we get out to the field this afternoon. I'll see if I can. Any more questions before I turn this over to Molly for SOS? Okay, Molly.
All right. So my name is Molly Bash. I'm the program manager for Save Our Shearwaters. And yeah, I guess my goal today is really just to give y'all a hopefully relatively quick, broad overview of our work and a bit of a virtual tour since we weren't able to actually get out there. So if you want to go ahead and get started. Thanks. So at SOS, we are a professionally staffed wildlife rescue and rehabilitation program. We are a permitted facility that operates 365 days a year. We accept all native Hawaiian birds and the Hawaiian hoary bat for rehabilitation on site. So we have grown over the years. As you guys likely know, we began in 1979. We were a state program. We are now a state registered nonprofit and really expanded our rehabilitation capabilities in the last decade for sure, but even the last 5 years. So continuing to just be able to do more on site, work with more wildlife veterinarians, and increase our level of care for native birds in need. So we also do seabird fallout response, which I'll talk a bit more about later and what that looks like for us. And that is, the main reason why we started in 1979. We were largely a fall operation, but as I mentioned, we are now a year-round operation with our doors open every day. So we also manage the SOS hotline. So we have a cell phone that's a 24/7 hotline, more or less, if we wake up, which we usually do. But for people general public to call, and we can help coordinate rescues and assist with, assessing situations over the phone and whether a bird needs to come in or not. Because especially with as many ground nesting species as we have and coastal species, there's a lot. Hopefully we can prevent from things coming in unnecessarily. We also maintain detailed patient records and manage a database for all of the birds that we handle, whether it's just in the field or in care. And yeah, that's something that we've really put a lot of time and effort into expanding the integrity of over the last 5 years for sure, but just trying to continually make that better and make sure that, as we learn more about these species and as we handle these last remaining ones, that we're collecting all the information we can while they are in hand and documenting it well. So we have quality records to look back on and interpret for whatever needs arise. So in that comes with the disease monitoring is an important part of what we do as well. So, being some of the only people to handle these species in a medical capacity, it's important that we are aware and understanding what's happening to the birds that we're seeing and getting in, especially if a cause of death is unknown. Particularly with working with so many endemic and endangered species, it's important to have a good sense of if they're not surviving care, why. So we work a lot with the Honolulu Field Station to make that happen. We do necropsies on site. We do sample collection. We have veterinary partners like IDEX Labs that we pursue sampling for to help make sure we understand what's going on with these birds. And then we also do a good amount of public outreach and education because, of course, especially with our fallout seasonal operations, we rely a lot on the general public to find these birds in the field and get them to their nearest aid station. And so if we're relying on people to do that, they need to know about fallout. They need to know what's going on. So, I know we work with KIUC to be working out or to get out the kind of campaigns before season goes, but we also visit schools, we go to community events and that sort of thing. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So how do we do this? This is just a look at our program staff. So we've got 5 people year round. myself, our facilities manager, rehabilitation manager, and then 2 technicians. And then every fall, we bring on 4 AVN technicians that are employed September through December to support our fallout response. So they're running the aid station routes and whatnot. I'll talk a bit more about in a second. But in addition to our direct SOS staff, we also work with wildlife veterinarians, which I just wanted to mention because that is a really important part of us doing what we do, even though they're not directly on staff. We do have contracted support with a wildlife veterinarian, and then also just other contacts that we know from working in a relatively small field of wildlife medicine that kind of weigh in on cases whenever we're seeking support in that area. But our current contracted wildlife veterinarian is Dr. Juan, who's there on the right. He was just over here last month to do a bone deletion surgery on an albatross foot. So that's what's going on there. But he's the wildlife veterinarian for the Hawaii Wildlife Center. So we work very closely with them. And he is the reason that we're, able to have the more sophisticated permits that we need. So he is the listed veterinarian on our rehabilitation permits, but in addition to that, allows us to have our site radiation license, DEA license, controlled substances, all of these things that we need to do what we do on site. So as far as a bit of a tour goes, the next couple slides are just going to be pictures of our different areas, but just to get y'all a bit more familiar with the new location. So we just moved here in December of 2021. This is up in Wailua, which has been a great area for us. It's and for the birds, it's much quieter and it's tucked back away from the highway a lot more. And so it's a better space for healing birds overall. So you're looking at an overview up top. Don't know if I'm able to point. Oh, great. Yeah. I'm move up here then. Can follow my finger a bit. Okay, thanks. So this is our wash pad area. Obviously, we like to joke we're rehabbers first, or cleaners first and rehabbers second. That is a large part of what we do. A large time is spent there. So this is where all of our cleaning and sanitation happens. This area, this box here, this 8x20 outfitted container is our lab, which I'll show more in a second. This is our outdoor shed. It's a covered area that has our wash sink and fridges and freezers and some additional storage. This 8x40 container is our exam and holding space. So that's where the primary, the bulk of wildlife care goes on. This building here used to be an old greenhouse that has been turned into our pool yard. So it's about a 10-foot by 50-foot area to kind of give you a span. And that's where we have our rehabilitation pools as well as our large outdoor aviary. And then this container here, this other 8x40, this one is not outfitted. So it's just a basic container, but that's our enclosed outdoor storage. So something we're able to lock up for all of our, tools and things like that. So these are just, side views you can kind of see, but we'll go a bit more in depth if you want to keep going. So looking at the outdoor shed, not in the way of the camera. So our laundry is out here as well as our wash sink. So one of the hurdles of kind of moving to a facility and needing to do everything from the ground up is things like making sure we have reliable hot water access where we need it, which we need at multiple different locations because we also need it in our exam room, right, for washing dishes and things like that. So we have a point use water heater right out here on the side, which feeds both of our laundry area as well as our wash sink that's tucked back there, which has been very effective. Haven't had an issue with our sometimes water pressure and hardness can affect how efficiently you're able to wash a bird. But that's been going well. Temperature control's been going well. And then, just basic outdoor materials storage goes on there. And just a glimpse at the less exciting stuff. So enclosed outdoor storage, all of our perching materials and everything relatively, quickly accessible for birds in care. And also where our the overflow gray crates are stored out of season because obviously during peak season our bird count gets much higher and we have to pull out all of these like shearwater petrel crates, whereas this time of year we only have like less than half of them out and readily used. So those get stored there. Currently our high volume aid stations, which I'll talk about a bit more at the end, are stored at the DOFA base yard. Thank you, DOFA. Because we just don't necessarily have the space that we used to at our old location to store them, but those might be stored on site once we get that figured out. So this is a look inside of our 8x20 container. So that red one that I showed in the initial slide, this is what we call our lab. We do, just starting from the left here, our x-ray machine is located like right here. It's this back corner. And we have our the whole lead vests and all of that garb, and a digital x-ray machine that we do own. We also have so this is like standing at the entrance of the container. And whenever you look in, that's where you see this table here and our anesthesia machine. So like whenever Dr. Juan came over to do that procedure, this is where we do it. It's not a, completely aseptic environment, but it's the best we can do. So haven't had any issues so far. And then it's also where we do our fecal analysis, blood smears. It's where our microscope and our centrifuge live, that sort of thing. So this space has also served, like this past season, whenever we had pretty high numbers, it's also served as a patient overflow for whenever our holding area wasn't entirely sufficient for all the birds that we had. We've also moved stressy, like Hawaiian petrels are notoriously stressy in care. And so sometimes they benefit more from being in an isolated area instead of being in the main holding area with all the other birds. So, we've been able to kind of tuck them away in here for the day, and we'll just stay out of the lab as much as we can. So it's the space is fully used and then some, but it does a lot for us. So this is a look at our exam room. So this is just at the entrance of that white container, the 8x40 that we were looking at. So whenever you walk in from the main doors of the container, you're in our exam room. And so these boards on the wall, these are the often totally full, and then sometimes we'll have a backup board during peak season, but those are our patient boards. We have all of our patients listed out and what's wrong with them, what their daily plan is, what they're in care for, medicines they're on, that sort of thing. It's how we kind of keep track of everything going on. We have 2 exam tables because during peak season, when we have a lot of birds, we'll be running 2 exams at one time. And the other stuff I just threw in here just to show the kind of more the necessities of what this space requires, which is, as I mentioned, we have our controlled substances certificate and DA license, and that also comes with needing like a lockbox to have controlled drugs. And so this space is able to check all those boxes for us. And then just to talk about that a little bit more. So of course, all of our birds get a full intake exam upon admission. We do blood work on everything. It gives us these guys are wild animals in general, are meant to hide any kind of vulnerabilities or illnesses with them. And so we can't just go off of behavior. We can't just go off how they're presenting, but their blood chemistries and whatnot can tell us a lot as well. So everything is fully monitored. And after that intake exam, and once we look at those initial blood values, we can get a treatment plan developed. And then from there, the birds are still getting daily exams each morning while they're in care. So, our goals there are to prevent any secondary issues and then monitor progress and then change their plans as we need to. So patient holding area. So that door that was in the back of the exam room, whenever you walk through that, you go into our patient holding area. So it's about a 8 foot by 19 foot space. And this is our main, if a bird comes in and he's on medications or just the initial stages of rehabilitation, this is where they're staying. So, these larger crates here, that's going to be like a nene or an albatross or something, whereas these smaller gray ones are shearwaters and petrels. And I put this picture in just because this is a drying pen and a white-tailed tropic bird. But this past year, we've started coming up with methods to collect guano, which has been a very cool kind of side project. We've been able to work with the botanical gardens and trying to do more kind of harvesting of this liquid gold that we have so much of and that they really, really appreciate. So got a good system worked out with them right now to help that. So our pool yard and conditioning pools, one of the hurdles with being up in a very rainy area was how to figure out what to do with all of this water that we are going through. Because at our old facility, we had an overflow process with our pools, and that's more ideal for bird rehabilitation. Obviously, they're very susceptible to any kind of impurities on their feathers, and waterproofing is so important for these species. So coming up with a system to get recirculating pools to a level that is sufficient and not impeding waterproofing or their health in any way was a hassle, to say the least, but we got there. And so we've got a good system right now that's working well for us, and using sand filtration, UV sanitation. And then we do chlorine at night, which we used to do as well. That's a normal thing in rehabilitation. And then we check the chemistry in the morning to make sure it's all good. And then it's just the sand filtration and UV throughout the day. So that's a common picture in season, if not more. And that's just a bunch of mules trying to look for things to hook their bill on to get out. They're very good at, but we actually, so the hard-sided pools that we bought, they have a, there's like these normal boxes that you'll see for in flow to the pool. We actually cut the side steel and moved it lower. So because it would have been much higher on the pool and they would have been getting out constantly. So we're able to move that lower, and that's been working well, keeping them in. So yeah, quite a process, but seems to be working well for us. So just another couple pictures of our outdoor housing options. So, I talked about the holding room being where our birds stay whenever they're, after their intake exam and they're in those beginning stages of rehab. As they move through the stages of rehab and they're stronger, they're, closer to release, they move to different aviaries depending on the species. So this is just a look at some of those aviaries. We've got 2 of these outdoor housing pens, these nene pens, and then a sand pen, and then this large aviary on the right there, which is our largest pen. So, we'll have Hawaiian geese in there, also Laysan albatross or red-footed boobies. It varies, but it's a very useful space for us. And that was, if you can tell up top, so that's actually sectioned off the back part of our greenhouse. So thankfully, because it was so much larger than our last pool yard, we were able to do that and really expand our housing options for several species. So this is something that we're in the process of replacing. At our old facility, we had this great Hawaiian duck habitat that's, they do really well in the aqueous environment whenever they're pre-release. So they just do really well being housed on water instead of actually in a pen, because they're, very water loving. And so it's something that we're in the process. We got grant funding to replace. So it is in process of being replaced. It's just not fully set up at the new facility yet, but we're working there. So, and we've got ducks for all kinds of reasons, but the most common being avian botulism. A lot of times they're not this small whenever we do get them, but whenever we do get them, it's almost better that we get 2 at once than 1, which tends to happen from time to time, but just to avoid habituation, because we'll end up having those guys for several weeks. We have 1 in care right now, who we actually had housed with a gosling for a little bit because it's at least another bird. But there's a stuffed animal and feather duster and all kinds of things, and we handle them as little as possible. So even if we do get them in at that size, we're still able to get them through to release successfully. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of our areas. just to go back to what seabird fallout operations really involve for us, we have these high volume aid stations that are deployed September 15th through December 15th each year. So they've got these little numbered cubbies and a board on the side with corresponding numbers. So we ask the public to take them to the nearest aid station, pop them in a cubby, write down when and where they found them. We've got 18 stations island wide, 11 of which are public aid stations that we have on our website. And each one of those is checked daily. So that's why we have the additional 4 staff members through the fall. We've got somebody that goes north, somebody that goes west every day, checks every single station. They will collect and examine birds in the field, and after they're trained to do so. And they're admitted for rehabilitation if any abnormalities are found. Any abnormalities are found. If they are fit and healthy, good weight, no, feces on their feathers or anything like that, bright, alert, responsive, no signs of collision, then it's possible for them to be banded, measured, and released in the field without ever having to come back to rehab, which is best case scenario. So that's, September 15th to December 15th, which is whenever we get a bulk of our birds for the year. I think like nearly half the birds for the year in that 4-month span of time. And then this is what bird drop-offs look like out of season. So after those high volume aid stations come down on December 15th, each fire station on Kauai receives a cardboard pet carrier with this label and a little note card that we replace on top. And so if you go to our website right now, our map of aid stations will just have all the fire stations on it. And so people can, ideally they can bring them to us, and usually they do. We're the ones kind of coordinating and telling them to bring the bird to the fire station. If they can bring it to Wailua, that's great, but sometimes they can't. So at least there's these different resources across the island for the bird to be in a safe, enclosed environment until we're able to pick them up. No, that's fine. That was really it. I just wanted to, give you guys a bit of a snapshot of what the in-season and off-season operations looked like. I'm gonna look at our facilities, but.
Thanks. This is Lainey Berry from DOFA. Can you tell me sort of just off the top of your head, what sort of numbers do you process each year, especially of the seabirds?
Yeah. So over 500 generally. This last fallout season was a big one for us. We had 171 Nules intakes alone. But yeah, usually a couple hundred, like I was saying, about over half of our birds come in that 4-month span of time. But that's across all species. But yeah, 500 plus is a pretty safe value these days. And like about 55% of those are T&E species.
So just following up on an earlier thread of conversation, as we see mitigation efforts be effective, we expect the numbers to grow. That's a pretty extensive operation. Do you feel like what's written into things for the next 30 years or whatever is going to be adequate to handle the increased fallout that you would expect to correlate with improved outcomes for the birds?
I do. And I think that, Don and I have talked too about the triggers that are in place for as species counts do increase. And I feel, comfortable with that. And, we've really been trying to increase our funding diversity and whatnot too in recent years. And so, that's this aside, that just gives us more stability as a program. So I think combination of those things. A bit of fun.
So just, you mentioned that you banned all the birds that come through. Is that valuable? Are you seeing birds return and nest, and is there a sense of the percentage of the success of the birds that are banded?
Are we talking about listed seabirds right now? Yeah, So the resites are few and far between because, again, a lot of times a bulk of the listed seabirds we're getting also are fledglings, right? And they're hatch years, and it's so few. Like those guys have such a hurdle ahead of them whenever they do go out to sea already. But in addition to that, them living in these, nesting in these areas that are difficult to access, we're seeing such a small amount of those back. So while we don't have regular resites, recoveries, whenever we do get them, it's very valuable. And we've had a good handful of those valuable records here and there. So, we had even like the one that comes to mind, it was a wedgetail, but one that we had rehabilitated for a pretty significant head trauma and released. And then unfortunately it was found as a recovery. It was actually by somebody on the IMP crew, Caitlin, but it was a DOA. It had been hit, it was on the side of the road, but the fact that it had continued its, life cycle and come back, I think it was 2 years later or something, was promising. So I think even though it's hard and they're not as easy to see as, the different waterbird resites we get and things like that, I think that the numbers still stand and represent a much larger population, hopefully, that are coming back and continuing.
And also to speak to that, as Molly was saying, we're not really searching for band recovery. So band recovery is a really poor way of assessing survival rate of these birds because we're only looking at a small number of colonies, and those colonies are less impacted by light attraction power line collisions anyway. And so that's why we did this tracking study together with SOS to look at the survival of birds after they leave SOS care. And certainly their survival rate is lower than if they hadn't been impacted by humans in the first place, but they still, a significant proportion of them continued their migration out to their first wintering grounds, and clearly shows that some of those birds do survive, as therefore SOS is an important component of the conservation of the species. And also, like Molly was saying, some of the birds that we tagged, there's one Hawaiian petrel which looked like a disaster. I mean, its head was smashed. I was pretty sure there's no way that bird was going to survive, and it went through care and survived, continued transmitting for months later. So it's pretty incredible what they can take as long as they receive good care like they get at SOS.
Thanks. You mentioned funding sources. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit about, you mentioned, there was a grant you got. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your funding sources in general? Because this is, relatively, this is a very impressive operation, and just interested in how you manage that. And then, I think as Melissa said, if there's need for a future expansion, is that this thing you can take on?
Yeah, so as far as funding sources go, obviously our largest for funding is coming from the utility company. But something we're just looking at increasing more is the amount of annual entity agreements that we have with people that do rely on our services. And that's been going really well. And people that, it's a win-win situation, right? They want us to continue keeping our doors open for all native species in need. And we want to keep doing that too. So it just helps ensure that the stability there. Also, and, I feel like since we have expanded and we've been able to bring on some additional staff members, it's given us more ability to pursue different conservation grants, rehabilitation grants. And so the pen builds that I mentioned, they're also funding 2 incubator purchases for us and a couple other important things. And that's with Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture. And so I think it's just really, it's more so, the additional staff, it almost pays for itself in a sense, because it allows us to put more time and effort into seeking out those sources. But and we also, we pursue grants, and I submit a proposal every year to the Wildlife Refuge Network on Kauai. And so, because we get birds from them too. So it's just trying to maintain those partnerships and those relationships with everybody. And hopefully, hope people paying into this thing can help us continue funding our growth and giving us the support we need to keep growing in this direction. And so far, so good. But I don't know if you want to.
I'll just add one thing to that. I mean, our goal is to fund SOS at a level that would address KIUC's commitments, but we don't want to limit SOS to just being specific to KIUC's
HCP goals. So we think we found a nice combination here, which allows SOS to grow and meet other needs around the island, but also takes care of KIUC's commitment through the HCP. So that's we're trying to strike the balance there.
Anyone else? No. Yeah, I think we're going to adjourn. Sorry, reset. Sorry, recess. So 1:30 at Ula Ula. So we're taking a lunch break now. For those of you who are this is the end of the virtual section, so we're now just in person only. So yeah, hope to see you all there. But yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you for those of you online. Yeah, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Leave.